Well, well, well. This is the few, the proud, the morning people. I don't know. Thank you guys for coming this morning. We've got a little kind of note package again today. You know, since Chip told us you always have to have notes, here you go.
He's guilted you into it.
Yeah, that's right. You're even going to get them in Sunday school this week.
Thank you.
Don't expect that every week.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
Oh, thank you.
After his class Thursday night,
Yeah.
I really felt like before my class Wednesday, I need to take a day off from work.
What'd you think about Chip's presentation?
It's good. It was more oriented toward the adult classes.
Yeah, it kind of left.
Left a lot of the other classes out.
Y'all know me being a simple morning person and it being late at night and not being an evening person, it filled my head full. I was nearly tired when I left. It was good though, I learned stuff.
His structure
Morning.
was geared, his words was geared towards adult classes and stuff, but there's some things, the time that he talked about putting in the classes.
Yeah.
that's For every class that you do, within, you know, and hopefully just open up some people's eyes, it's just, you know, because I always tell people sometimes, you know, not Saturday night, you don't start, you know, with, and it is, and if you're prepared Tuesday or Wednesday for the class Sunday, it is so much easier.
Yeah.
And it makes it so much more fun and enjoyable on the class. You know.
Well, since I ain't talked much,
Yeah.
as you know, but I've been trying to have, he was saying be 2 or 3 weeks ahead, I am not.
That is a wonderful theory.
I show the weekend,
Yeah.
what I plan on doing Wednesday night, and then Monday afternoon, when I get home from work Monday and Tuesday, I usually try to go down and try to go through what I'm gonna say and do at the class.
Yeah.
But I'm happy for myself if I've got mine finished when I go to bed on Sunday night before Wednesday. But
But that still gives you time to think about it in a few days. to kind of mull over it.
that's right. But I haven't, what he was talking about, I haven't even looked to see what I'm doing in 2 weeks. I'm more worried about this Wednesday.
Well, you know,
I agree with you, Randy.
it's one of those things. It's a good piece of advice. The further ahead you get, the better. But at the same time, there are only 168 hours in a week, and you know, honestly, it takes a little less exegetical work to teach kindergartners the Jonah story than it does an adult class. You know, you don't probably have to use any Hebrew words in your kindergarten class, but if you can make the time to study it and learn what the Hebrew words say and tell the story more accurately, even if you don't ever tell the kid one of those things, I think you come out with a better class.
You don't have to teach the kindergarten the Hebrew word.
No.
But you've got to teach it in kindergarten words.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
Yes.
I mean, that's almost as hard to figure out how to say it in kindergarten
Yeah.
words than it is to adult words.
Yeah. But for me, it is
Yeah. And not everybody can do that.
Yeah.
Not everybody can keep a kindergarten. When I'm down here in the hall and I see the classes over with, when we have a lot of kids, and I can tell you which teachers were more prepared that Sunday, or felt better, or were simply sometimes by the attitude of the kids that come out of the class.
Yeah.
You know.
If nothing else, I hope that Thursday night you got some ideas on how deep preparation can be done, and the benefit that comes from it. I hope that he pushed you a little bit. He did me. I'd heard most of what he'd said about being prepared in advance before, but I did finish this lesson last night. You know?
But I feel good if my lesson is finished by 6:59 and I start teaching.
As long as you didn't start at 6:58. And I've said this before, a good teacher and a good speaker at 6:55 can put something together that will work in a pinch. But if he does that 2 weeks in a row, take him out back and shoot him.
Well, and one of the things, that not Sunday school, but public speaking, that I was taught a long, long time ago, that if you speak 30 minutes to 100 people, that's 50 hours of time. It's
Yes.
human nature's time that you've taken from those people. Well, how much investment of your time should you put in to take 50 hours from somebody else?
Yes.
You know, with it. So, I mean, anytime you're speaking to a group, there's the time investment in that, and it's unfair to them if I'm not, and I've done it, somebody's been sick and you feel inflamed, and I feel horrible.
Yeah.
Because you know, with it, so, but yeah, that's one way that I always try to look at it, is these people and all the hours of their time
Yes.
that I'm using, am I going to do the best that I can?
There's another little anecdote they like to throw around too. The shorter your lesson, the more time it takes to prepare. Now, when you first start teaching, you think, how in the world am I going to fill 40 minutes? Randy, you feel that? Teach about 10 more times.
Had 7:15.
Teach about 10 more times, and it will start to be, well, it's 7:30. How did I get here? And then it'll be 7:40. How did I get here? If you're not careful, it'll be 8:15, and then how did I get here? And I've done that. You've suffered through that a few times. But it does take work to make something concise. It takes work to put it together. So I appreciate it. Anything else?
Just like I said, you know, in that class on Wednesday night, about the second class, I taught, I said, I have 8 pages of notes and I'm only on page 3.
Yeah.
But the main material is in the first few pages.
Right. It's hard to figure out what to go, and especially if you start throwing in elements of discussion, then the time thing goes way crazy. Because if you're just straight lecturing, it takes a little while at first, because the first few times you teach, you're a little bit terrified and you fly through it. You know, this 23 pages got done in 7 seconds. I just broke a land speed record, you know. But then I'm going to ask you guys some questions today, and I have no clue how long some of those questions are going to take. I was a little bit surprised we've had this conversation as long as we have, honestly. So we'll move on. But timing's one of those things that you just sort of have to learn by doing wrong a few times on your own. And Butch, would you start? And Keith always talks more than you want.
Then like we talked before, you might talk 200 words a minute, I might talk 50 words a minute.
And that changes things. And how you...
He said that's on a good day.
And it changes based on how you feel too. If it is an evening class and I'm wide awake and I've had a good dinner and it's been a good day, you're going to get one thing. But Sunday morning auditorium class is one of the hardest sessions for me to teach. I love Wednesday night classes. It's probably my favorite thing to get to teach, because people come in. Sometimes you've had a hard day, sometimes people don't feel good, but to me I'm ready to go. I'm ready for this. I need this shot in the arm. Sunday morning, it's alarm clock, shower, get to church, got a room full of people, better do something. You know, just the way Matthew's wired, that's harder. Butch, lead us in a prayer, please.
Our Father in heaven, we are thankful to you for this beautiful morning you blessed us with. Father, we're thankful for those that are here to desire to be better teachers of your word, that we may present to others in a way that be easy for them to understand, that may be able to be absorbed by them and put into practice and apply to their lives. Father, we thank you for Matthew and the efforts he's put into this. We ask that you be with him as he instructs us now. Help us to take it to heart. In your son's name we pray.
Amen. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that very much. We're going to depart from the original schedule quite a bit today. The plan will be to get done earlier than the original schedule said, and to cover a few things that are slightly different than we originally talked about, just based on who's here and how the last couple sessions have gone. I hope you don't mind if we tweak a little bit. One of the questions that comes up every time you're talking is this. Randy, you brought this up a time or two. You weren't the only one, though. Nerves. Do you get nervous when you teach?
More so the age.
Man, you want to make me nervous? Put me in a room full of kindergartners. You have me squirming like I'm on death row, you know. What makes you nervous about teaching? You mentioned the age.
If they're my age and they have, or older and they have
Come in,
more
come in, come
experience
in.
than I do, that makes me nervous.
Okay. Come on
I'm
in.
teaching someone older than me that knows a lot more than I do. And it's like, why am I teaching? They should be teaching me. I should be teaching them.
I always get nervous if I'm not prepared.
Okay.
I mean, if I'm prepared and have it, I guess that, you know.
Your preparation affects how nervous you feel or don't feel.
What time it is in the class? Like, if it's the beginning of the class, I'm always nervous. Like, if anytime it's a new class, I'm nervous. Just because you don't know how it's going to go.
Yeah, you've got new material.
Fear of the unknown, I guess.
It is, I think.
And one thing that makes me nervous, what questions might the class members ask.
Yeah, you never know exactly what's going to come up when questions get asked. That is a big unknown, isn't it? You don't know for sure what someone might do to you. What do you do about being nervous when you teach?
You take deep breaths.
Okay, that's a great piece of advice. Just
That oxygen does wonders for you.
yes, it does.
And of course, you do a lot of praying.
Okay, you do a lot of praying. You breathe. That's important. I haven't seen a class teacher forget to breathe real long, but I have heard of some people who forget to breathe. And those classes usually make it on America's Funniest Home Videos.
Well, that's one thing I know for sure, just like Miss Nina said, I pray about it.
Good.
But I know when I do get started in a class, that God's going to get me through it.
Yeah.
You know, so.
He's a fan of what you're doing.
And being prepared makes it. You feel more confident and you get up and get it going. If you've got a good start and a good finish, and you have the knowledge and overflow in your reservoir of what you're going to be teaching.
For me, those nerves seem to go away within the first few minutes. Once it gets started, especially if you got a class with a lot of discussion.
Once you kind of get over that initial, am I going to mess this whole thing up? I have a list that someone gave me of some things to do with your nerves, and I don't know if this will help you because processing nervousness via lists doesn't seem quite like the right way, but it's a few things that maybe you'll think about, maybe it'll help you. The first thing, use your nerves, your nervous energy to drive you to prepare. Let that fact that the class isn't done gnaw at you a little bit and make it bump up your priority list during the week. Kind of use that as energy to help you as you teach. Second thing I'd say is prepare well, really well. You've already said that, haven't you? The better prepared you are, the better you feel. The more confident you are when you teach if you know what you're talking about. That doesn't mean that it's going to go perfect, but it helps if you ever get thrown off course, if you know your stuff backwards and forwards. Pray. Like Randy said, pray, 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 pray. God is a fan of this whole teaching thing, especially when you're teaching His Word rightly. And know that He cares. Next, remember you have, in my words, 99.9% of the time, the friendliest audience someone could ever have when you teach at Sunday school. By and large, when you teach, and especially here at Burns, the people in the room want to see you succeed, and the God who is watching the room wants to see you succeed in teaching His Word. Use that as some comfort. It's not like you're going and trying to sell something to a room full of people that don't want to buy it. You're teaching to a friendly group. You're preaching to the choir. Where do we get that phrase, I guess? Remember, God's with you. That's the next one. Remember that God is with you as you teach and as you want to teach. And based on that, remember it's not your words that count. It's His Word. Sometimes the goal is just to get out of the way of His Word and let His Word speak. The prophet said His Word does not return void. It doesn't come down and do nothing. It does something. Even if you don't think you did anything, His Word can do something. Sometimes when I prepare for a lesson, I pray, Lord, help me get out of your way today. Because we need to do that sometimes. I heard one preacher who prayed this: Lord, you know I want this class to be good, but let it be about you. And kind of change the standard of what makes it makes it good. And Keith told me about another famous prayer. You know what prayer that would be?
The shepherd's prayer.
Yes, the shepherd's prayer. Are you familiar with the shepherd's prayer? Keith, explain.
Well, it's been said that when Alan Shepard was
Test pilot, astronaut, the right stuff.
was in the capsule ready to go up, he said, "Oh Lord, please don't let me mess up."
I think that's an okay prayer, isn't it? Lord, don't let me mess this up. It's a reasonable thing to pray. And the last thing, remember, it gets easier. I still have nervous energy when I teach, especially like you guys said, if it's something new, if it's something different, if it's a group of people I'm not used to. It's funny. If James is in the front row when I preach, I kind of have a tick where I watch him. Because I know he knows what he's talking about when he preaches, and I feel that way sometimes with Glenn too. But because James and I sat in the same room talking about sermons so many times, when I mess up, I know James heard that. And I know that's the silliest little thing. That's just one of the little ways that it still affects me, but you get over it. You pass it. A couple other tips too. Don't apologize too much. I break this rule a lot, but I'm apologizing while breaking the rule. You see what I'm doing here? If something you do is going to distract from the lesson, if you've got a sore throat, sure. But people are generous. People are kind here. You don't have to apologize for your failing, your perceived failing as a teacher. It's not as bad as you think. And speaking of messing things up, sometimes it's easier to learn by how not to do things, isn't it? Do any of you have jobs where you have to sit through PowerPoints and presentations and like lectures and stuff about what you're doing? I know Jeff does. I'm sure somewhere in the state they make you, Butch.
Occasionally.
And I'm sure there's training at your place, Randy, and there's, here's how not to kill someone today, And sometimes those things are painful. So I want you to imagine what the Gettysburg Address could have looked like had it been done in PowerPoint. And if it had been done by an HR type person. Good morning. Just a second while I figure out how to work this clicker. Which button is it? Is it the left or the right? That's not right. Hang on. How do I get this thing on? While we're waiting, my name is Abe Lincoln, and I'm the president. I just want to thank the judge here for the committee supervising the dedication of this graveyard. It's good to be here. Wow, this technology is hard sometimes, isn't it? That was bright. What do I do? Is this on? Here we go. Here it is. Okay. I'm Abraham Lincoln, and this is the Gettysburg Cemetery dedication. This is our agenda for today. We've met on a battlefield, and that was a great battlefield, actually. We have dedicated a portion of the field, and it's fitting. There are great tasks that are unfinished. Now, there are some things that are not on the agenda. I hope you got these in your notes. We're not here to dedicate, consecrate, or hallow in the narrow sense this ground, so we're not going to do that. We can't really add or detract from what has happened here. And make note of this. People will not know to remember what we say here, so no big deal. Okay, here are our key objectives and critical success factors. Let's see, we've got our unique nation because of liberty and equality. Well, most people are equal, actually. Shared vision. There's this new birth of freedom, government of and by and for people. Now, let me show you that 7 years ago, there wasn't a nation, but now there is a new nation. So this is the chart of 87 years ago nations and today nations. I hope that you can see the relative difference from 0 to 1. And to summarize this presentation, there's a new nation here. There has been this pesky Civil War thing, but we're here to dedicate this field to unfinished work and freedom and government and stuff. Thank you. Now, would anyone have remembered that presentation?
All of them.
But that does get remembered. It's simple. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth to this continent. It's one of the great speeches, I think, probably of all time, certainly of the era. Sometimes we can get in the way of the message that we teach by by trying to complicate it with slides or handouts and activities and stuff. Just make sure you keep the message the message. Keep the main thing the main thing. Simple way to get us started today. So to review, you remember this pyramid? What did it describe? What is this talking about? Okay, stages of learning. What are stages of learning?
What happens as time goes along? We're trying to grapple with information, knowledge, concepts.
Okay.
Process of getting knowledge and transferring it to understanding.
Okay. Process of getting information and processing it into life, living it, using it, evaluating. So this was an important thing for us. This is where we started the first session, this communicating for a change. And I proposed that this is a pretty good plan for when you're developing lessons, finding a goal, picking a point, so on and so forth. And if you didn't hear anything else, one of the big if you didn't hear anything else's of our first session was have a if you didn't hear anything else. Have an overarching goal, have a purpose, have a point, make sure everything serves that. First session, we had this handout for your homework of multiple intelligences. Did you look at that any? Very good. I want to go over this multiple intelligence stuff a little bit. People learn differently, and that's something that you already know. But how they learn is something that's worth studying. The quote that goes along with this theory, multiple intelligence theory, is it's not how smart you are, it's how you are smart. I think that's a pretty good way to put it. It's not how smart you are, it's how you are smart. Looking at this list, there are linguistic, logical, spatial, bodily, musical, interpersonal, intrapersonal, and naturalist learning styles, learning intelligences. Can you play question and answer with me real quick? If you can pack your car on a vacation so that there is not so much as a square inch of air in your trunk, and you can fit your entire house in the trunk, which are you? Which one of these?
I would think logical and mathematical.
Okay. Any others?
Or spatial.
Spatial. Those are the two that would generally get described there. That's my dad. He can pack your whole house in the back of the car. It takes him 3 days to go anywhere because he unloads it, reloads it, moves 3 bags around, puts 17 bags in. But by the time it's done, he knows that he has the weight over the axle where he wants it, and it all fit. Now, when I pack, I look like a homeless guy's shopping cart. It's just all sort of thrown in there. We don't have the same thing. If you are keen to journaling and replaying your thoughts and feelings and trying to figure out why you felt the way you did, which one of these likely describes that behavior?
Say it again, if you want.
If you like to journal, if you like to spend time in introspection, figure out why you felt the way you did, which one of these is likely your strength?
Interpersonal.
Inter or intra?
Intra.
Oh, I accidentally used one of the words on the screen, didn't I? I gave it away. Intrapersonal. You know those people who know just the song for the occasion? I call them the human jukeboxes. They're the people who, know what just the right song is. It amazes me. I don't really like her show, but Delilah, you hear her on the mix station at night. I listen to her during Christmas because she plays Christmas music. The rest of the year, I don't want to hear about her failed love life. But these people call in from all over the country with sob stories. And somehow she figures out a song that has something to do with everyone. I just went to Iraq, but my puppy got adopted and I lost everything in the stock market. Do you have a song that says something about that? And then it's already playing in the background. I don't know how they do that, but they do. That's a musical leaning. Here's another one for that one. If you ever notice that a tune feels mournful, if you're one of those people that notices how tunes feel, not just how they sound. That's a musical person. If you're a person who notices when a friend just isn't themselves, which one would that be? Interpersonal. These are pretty well supported by psychological and educational research of different ways that people learn. And my dad's strength, though he can pack the car full enough that you can't actually move it out of the driveway, it's so heavy, don't ask him to observe if mom's in a good mood that day. Know what I mean? That's not what he is good at. Does he need to work on that? Well, probably, but don't tell him I said that. You can see which way he leans. I have different leanings on this list, so do you. And that's what those tests were about, figuring that out. If you are linguistic, you're good at finding the right word. That doesn't necessarily mean that reading is your favorite hobby, but it's a gift of yours. You know what words mean, and not just what they mean, kind of the connotation. You know, when there's two words that mean the same thing, you know which one to choose and why. If you're logical, mathematical, you know those Sudoku puzzles? That's you. That describes you to a T. If you want to count cards in Vegas, give me a call. I'd like to see somebody rip off the casinos for a change instead of vice versa. If you are spatial, that means that you are good at seeing things in space, basically. You see things like a puzzle. You like solving puzzles? You know where you put the pieces in? That's a spatial thing. If you can organize a room, Jeff would like your help in the education office. If you can do that, that would help. Bodily kinesthetic. Not necessarily the world's greatest athlete, but you're in motion, and the way that you move and the way that your body works is something that teaches. You are an adjuster. Musical, you hear rhythm and pitch. That doesn't mean you can sing. That doesn't mean you can play something. But it probably does mean you try in the shower. And it probably does mean that you have the radio on. You're the type that would do that. Interpersonal, you read between the lines with relationships. You understand the 23 different ways, the 23 different things your wife can mean when she says she feels fine. And you know which one she's talking about. That's also the definition of a miracle worker. Intrapersonal, you consider yourself, how you think, why you think. In a naturalist, well, you notice nature. You notice the outdoors, the zoo. You're not necessarily a tree hugger, but you're aware of what's going on out there. That's different ways people learn. The point of all this stuff, though, is if each person is slanted a little bit, if I can figure out how to work in some of these areas in what I do, I can connect with more people. And take naturalists, for example. I'm not going to bring a grizzly bear in Sunday morning in Sunday school to make my point when we talk about the bear mauling the children that called Elijah Baldhead. Well, if I could find a way to, I might actually, but that's a different point. But being aware to that aspect of the story, or being aware to the cues of nature and emphasizing those, helps me connect with those people. It doesn't have to be a big thing. It's just being aware that some people are moved by that. The things that move me are not the same things that move you, and vice versa frequently. Can I give you the practical point of this? In the Joseph class, here's how I've tried to emphasize these areas. The linguistic, I've tried to emphasize the word plays, some of the nuances of words in the Joseph story. How robe shows up a lot, or how Joseph, when he tells his story of dreaming, he sounds kind of breathless, keying in on some of those facts. Logical, I try to talk about the cost for Joseph, deduct what he would have encountered, the time in jail, the money it cost for him to be sold. Well, if it costs 20 shekels and the price for this is this, what does that say about Joseph? You're kind of the if-then stuff. Spatial, I've tried to show you some maps and tried to help you picture the places he was. Musical, you notice how each week starts with a song? That may be the only thing somebody remembers. So that isn't an accidental, and it's not a filler. I would like that 2.5 minutes back, but I think it's valuable. I do it. Interpersonal, I try to read between the lines of Joseph's relationship with others. Intrapersonal, I try to say, what is Joseph thinking? What would I be thinking if I were Joseph? Why? What would I be feeling? Naturalist, what would you learn from his surroundings? What was it like to be in a pit, cold and wet? And make that come alive. Now, I'm doing this with words Sunday morning, and sometimes with pictures, and sometimes with songs, but the more ways you can do it, the better you are. Take what Chip taught Thursday night about how to formulate a lesson plan and kind of look for those cues. Add that as something you can look for. Questions, comments?
On the bodily kinesthetic part, some people can move way too much. If you're constantly moving, walking back and forth, it makes you dizzy trying to look at them and listen to them. So be a little still.
There's a potential for problem on every one of these if you don't do it wisely. But if you do it wisely, movement can be a pretty good teaching tool. You'll notice in a movie in the first half, the actors almost always walk across the screen this direction. And the cars almost always drive across the screen this direction. Because since we're used to going left to right when we read and when we look at anything pretty much, that sort of signifies moving forward. And now, I've never sat in a movie and thought, the characters are moving left to right. That means it's moving forward. You don't think that, but because that's how they always do, if you notice, when they make the trip to wherever they're going, that's what they do. And if they make the trip back home, they go the other way. And it looks funny if they switch it. You notice it. You might not notice what's wrong, but something in your head will go, there's something wrong with this movie. It's not done quite right. You'll notice that sort of stuff. Just a little cue. Sometimes you can actually learn something from Hollywood. Accidents happen. Anything else?
Well, and if you think of each one of those things and try to work, it's interesting, with it because of trying to do the lessons and then, to be honest with you, I'm thinking of Glenn's classes and Keith's classes and yours classes, and I'm actually going through my mind of the different points and what I've seen and because Glenn's been teaching a long time. He may not know all this, but he'll do a lot of these things.
Yeah.
With the body, the movement part. Well, when I teach, I actually think about my body position as I'm getting a point. If I'm asking a question and I want somebody to give a good answer, I purposely will slide in a pew, lean back, and put my arms together to show.
There's no longer a pulpit between you and them. You're relaxed. It says something.
Yes.
I am an idiot when it comes to that one. I have to work hard to make that one, and I don't frequently spend the time to do that like I should. You probably have an area that you're weak on too. I have more than just that one. And I'm not saying every time you write down a lesson you need to put a list. Am I doing this, and this? This is just to make you aware of how things work. And on one of those rare occasions when you actually have more time than you were counting on, go through this and just say, have I done this in a while? Or what am I missing? That's the most powerful one to me. What am I not doing that could have helped? You're just trying to help make new ways for this information to get in their head, stay in their head, and then come out their actions is all you're trying to do. Anything else? Well, there's some different ways you can put this. If you're a visual person, see, I'm repeating the information, showing it to you in a different way. Now I'm standing over here when I do it this time. You're looking at it. When we took Greek, one of the things you would do, you would say your vocabulary while you would write it down. So your hand feels the motion of writing down the word. You are seeing it. You are hearing it. And unfortunately, you're still forgetting it when the quiz comes around. But the theory is you remember things better that way. Okay. Discussion time. Woohoo! Our guest for this is Robert Oglesby, who I told you the other day is 48 years in the same congregation, which, as far as I'm concerned, either wins you a Nobel Peace Prize or a home for the criminally insane. I'm not sure which. He has done incredible work out there, and I met him a couple years ago at a workshop that he did for young preachers. But before we get going into what he has to say, I just want to get us started talking about, and I'm using these categories very broadly, but lecture, yeah, we'll find a new one. Lecture and discussion. What are some of the advantages to teaching lecture style? Is this better?
You're in control.
Okay. Control. That's much better. Control, information. What else?
You don't have to answer questions.
You don't have to answer questions. That is a major pro sometimes. Okay? Anything else?
You can look at everybody simultaneously.
Huh?
You can kind of gauge learning across the broad spectrum.
Those who are awake or not awake.
Yeah.
Snorers versus not. You can see things if you're paying attention in a lecture. Why do people clip their nails in Sunday school? Seriously? It's a pet peeve, by the way. You see things. Okay, cons of lecture. What is a disadvantage of teaching with a lecture?
A whole bunch of information.
Okay?
Too much information.
TMI, too much information. Okay? You can, Randy said, Thursday night he left with his head full. And sometimes in a lecture class, you leave with your head full about 15 minutes into an hour-long class. That's a risk. Okay? What else?
There's no feedback.
No feedback? What'd you say, Leah? Okay. Students don't get clarification. Students, no question. You don't get feedback yourself. Well, not verbally, at least. You do see if they're snoring. And you do see if they're nodding. And you do see if they're walking out angry. And you do see if they're elbowing each other. Anything else?
You only get one learning style.
Okay.
It's all the verbal. Unless you're doing a PowerPoint, then you only have a visual and verbal.
Okay. Anything else? Discussion. What are some advantages? Actually, let's start with disadvantages. What are some disadvantages of discussion?
There can be a lot of questions.
There can be lots of questions.
Forks in the road.
A lot of times you're just swapping ignorance.
Okay. Swapping ignorance.
Control.
No preparation in what's being said.
Okay. The potential for no preparation. What did you say?
The students is what you mean there, right?
No control. Same thing.
No control. Okay.
Less control. I guess you have control.
Anything else disadvantageous of discussion?
You can get off track.
Okay.
Go somewhere you don't want it to.
Not following any kind of a plan, reaching a goal.
Okay. Advantages.
Students can learn, really learn. Like they get an act, or kind of a discovery kind of technique where they learn it for themselves.
Okay. Increased discovery. Is that a fair word?
Yeah, maybe increased retention.
Okay. Okay. What else?
Sharing of knowledge.
Sharing of knowledge. This is a dry erase marker, isn't it?
If it's a Sharpie, you'll find out.
Yes, I will. Didn't smell good enough. Anything else? Are there any other advantages?
You just find out from your audience kind of where they stand in what you're talking about. You know, their experiences they have had with different situations might help you out in something you're going through now.
Okay.
I don't know how you want to write that down. But
Yeah, I'll write a book there. Immediate feedback from audience, contribution of other viewpoints, I think is Anything else advantageous?
I don't know the word for this, but kind of like increased community, or like you feel like you have ownership
Okay.
of the class.
Do you know how to put that in words for me?
I don't know, like you feel like you're part of it. So
You feel more part of it, you feel more involved.
Okay.
Anything else on any of these categories? I'll open it back up.
One thought that comes to my mind is how you would perceive these styles of teaching, maybe how you learn. If you learn one way, you might like that style of teaching a lot better.
I'm going to write that down just as your style is up here looking at this list, okay? I am pretty visual. If you tell me that Nazareth was northwest of Jerusalem, I'm going to nod my head. I'm going to say okay. And then I'm going to turn to Leslie and say, what were you just talking about? If you show me a map and say, Jerusalem, Nazareth, I'm probably not going to forget it. I'm weird. That sticks in my head that way. If we're trying to put something together, if we've made the horrible mistake of buying furniture, and Leslie actually convinces us to use the instructions, if she reads them to me, I am hopeless. It means nothing to me. Now, if she hands me a screw and says, put that there, I can do it. But if she says, insert screw A17 into slot B72 and tighten 7.5 turns clockwise, I'm going to throw the directions at her. That's how I work. Some of you probably work differently than that. If you hand me the sheet, I do okay. Let's hold that list, and then I want to show you what good old Dr. Oglesby has for us. This is a little bit longer of a clip, but I think you'll enjoy it.
All right, good.
Very good. Well, thank you again for your time today. Did you get my email with a little bit of what I had planned, or did that
Yes,
make
that's fine. That or be fine, or anything else you want to come up with. I'm used to working off the cuff, so I don't have to have prepared questions.
Well, very good. I just thought that would kind of give us a plan. So if you don't mind, tell our folks a little bit about you and your work with the church.
All right. It's a long history, but do we lose it?
I still see you. There we go.
Okay. It's a long history, but it can be reduced pretty briefly. I came here 48 years ago, this church, and I was the first pulpit preacher, and so far I've been the only pulpit preacher. And so I stayed 48 years, and after 30 years, they gave me a written contract. They said they thought my probation was over, and I might be able to last. And we've gone from a church of 140, and at one point we hit 1,300. But then we started a church plant in North Plano, which is about 9 miles from here, and that church now has grown just about to the same size we are, because we put them right in the middle of the growth section, and they've done quite well. So we're still here, and I've been doing the group discussion thing for 40 years of 48.
So you don't have much experience staying around one place, is what you're telling me.
I don't have much experience at trying out.
Well, I suppose that's an okay place to have some weak spots. So.
Yeah, that's a blind spot in my resume.
Well, I think you'll do okay. Just for our class's benefit, I wanted them to know about how long you'd been working in this one spot. I met you at Harding University when I was down there for one of my master ministry classes. 2 years in a row, you've done workshops that have been beneficial. And one of the years you presented this book, which I bet you recognize better than they do, but some copies are on the way to us.
Yes.
Group Dynamics in the Bible class, and that's why we're talking today. What made you decide to write that book? The
actual reason for the book is an interesting reason. I began doing seminars and demonstrating how to do this. And then when I'd leave, they'd need something to reinforce it. And they couldn't remember it all. And I wrote the book to follow the seminar, not vice versa. In fact, I never did like to sell the book to anyone unless they saw the seminar. Because once you see what I do, then when you read the pages, you'll say, oh, yeah, I understand now what he was talking about. And so I experimented for 7 years, Matthew, before I wrote that book. I wanted to be sure that I got it right and I didn't have to eat some of the pages saying, uh-oh, that's wrong.
Well, very good.
So that, anyway, lots of time.
Well, it's neat the way it starts. It throws you immediately into a hypothetical class that has a few things that probably don't go exactly like you wish they would, but you show how you handle them. And I hope that everybody gets a chance to read it and really dive into it.
All right.
You started doing these seminars to present this method, but what made you decide to start doing the seminars about group discussion and group dynamics?
Well, I started doing it here. I'd begun to slowly learn about it, and as I began to get it straight in my head and made all the mistakes to make, and then as you make a mistake, you learn a good point, and then you don't forget that one. And so what really happened then was people needed to have something to refer to, and so I experimented for those 7 years so I could write that book that maybe would help. Now, I could write another book today, twice the size of that one, but I never have because I've been at it for another 30 years or so. But the thing that I wrote the book for was a way to propagate the thing and make it stick in people's minds. Every book I've written, I didn't particularly want to write. It was a total necessity because people just said, I can't remember this. You got to give me something. So that's why I wrote it.
You mentioned you learned from your mistakes. Could I dare ask what some of the more memorable mistakes were?
Well, the more memorable mistakes, I have a tub full that I can give you. But let's take the most significant one, I think, was I would work with the teachers on Wednesday night that we're getting ready for Sunday. We have a preparation class, we call it. And I would go in there and things would happen sometimes, and I couldn't figure out. At that point, my perception was not very good. So what I did, I put a tape recorder in the room, didn't make a big deal, just put it over to the one side so everybody could hear it. And I got to noticing that every once in a while, something would just ignite the group and they'd get in kind of a battle mode. And I think, who did that? I mean, what's going on? So I put the tape in, and most of the tapes I didn't have to listen to because nothing big happened. Then all of a sudden, one night, the explosion happened, and everybody was not in good humor, and they seemed to be mad at me, and I didn't know what the problem was. So I could take the tape then, and I could run it forward and listen to the explosion. Then I could go back, and I could listen again, and I think, now what's causing this? Well, what I discovered, I found the culprit. The culprit was me. What I did, when I would get toward the end of the class and we needed time to pull it together, I would feel the tension. And when I would feel the tension, I would press a little bit. And that meant I was running out of time, but they took it as aggressiveness, that I was kind of angry. So that's when I learned how to solve that problem, because it was really disconcerting to discover I was causing the problem. Yeah. So what I learned to do was to take off my watch. And when we got in the last 5 minutes of class, which is when I need to summarize and draw a conclusion, I would take my watch off and look at it, and I would say, guys, the clock is whipping us. We're running out of time. Just the fact of showing them my watch And in essence, I was non-verbally saying, it's not you that's making me feel this way. It's the clock. It's this watch.
Yeah.
From then on, I had no more troubles because they understood what it was. So it's just basic communication. But
Yeah.
that intense toward the end of a class, that's one of my big mistakes. And it took me a while to figure out what it was. But when I found it, the solution was absolutely perfect. It never failed again.
Yeah.
There's some other things that I learned. One of them was, one of the big ones was when someone would come up with some off-the-wall crazy thing that was absolutely no proof for.
Yeah.
I had a bunch of guys that were all sharpshooters, and so they'd jump on the guy, and then they'd keep interrupting him, and it'd go on and on for 10 minutes, and it wasn't important, wasn't worthwhile. So we had one fellow that did that one night, and I said, okay, fellas, everybody relax now. And instead of interrupting, let's just listen to this man. And then I'd turn to him and say, now you just tell us everything you know about that. In other words, we're not going to interrupt, we're going to listen. It took him about 35 seconds to tell us everything he knew. And that taught me the lesson. You don't push people back in the shell, you pull them out of their shell. And it makes it work better. But I use the word, that's counterintuitive. That doesn't seem right.
Yeah.
And so much of what I'm going to tell you as we're interviewing, so much of what I tell people turns their mind upside down and backward. They say, that doesn't sound right. That won't work. Yeah, it will. It's very fundamental. It works. But it is different. It's different from the way I was raised and different from the way I was trained. I didn't learn this in school.
Yeah.
I learned it on my own.
I can already sort of hear some of the people who will listen to this material saying, well, that'd be a nice problem to have. When I ask a question, they don't fight. They just stare at me.
Right.
What would you say to those folks?
What I'd say to those folks is people say, some people don't want to talk. Well, that's a blanket statement. And unfortunately, it's not really true. Here's what they really mean to say. In the circumstance and the setting in which we're in, and the kind of question I ask, and the fear that they have of being embarrassed, they don't want to talk. Now, that is a statement of fact. That is absolutely true. But what if you changed everything? What if you asked a question they could answer? What if you set a tone that was very comfortable and relaxed and not threatening? Then what might happen? Well, then you would have discussion. So the trick is, if you want to call it a trick, it's or just an insight. What you do to people like that, you ask a question to begin with that anybody can answer. And then after they've answered, then you enlarge whatever the conclusion was they gave you, or you segue over into a Bible lesson or a point, and they're already talking. What I call that is getting the first olive out of the bottle. When you go to the grocery store and you buy one of those cylindrical shaped bottles of olives, I always ask, what's the hardest one to get out? And the answer is the first one. You have to prise it out. But when you prise it out, you can turn the bottle upside down, the rest of them will roll out. Yeah. People are the same way. Get the first olive out of their bottle, the first comment. And once you've got that, the rest of that one will come very easy. They will start saying, oh, yeah, and let me tell you one other thing about that. Now, here's an example. Let me give you an example of you're starting a Bible lesson, and you want to ask a question that everybody can answer. Okay, let's take Mary, the story of Mary and Martha, and Jesus comes to their house. And as you know, Mary sits at Jesus' feet, and Martha's in the kitchen, and Martha gets irritated because Mary's not helping, and so all this happened. Now, that's just old standard Mary and Martha stuff, but that's not where I start. What I tell them is, My first question is, I know you read your lesson today, but I've got a question I want to ask you. This is hypothetical. Everybody's got an answer, but I just want to see what it is. For instance, I said, if Mary and Martha went to the same church with you, and if they lived in different houses, which they don't, I understand that, it's hypothetical, and if both of them ask you for lunch, and you could say yes to whichever one you wanted without offending the other. I don't know how you do that, but that's it's my question, so I'm going to make it up. So, and you could take up either invitation you want. Would you go home with Mary or would you go home with Martha? Now, anybody in the world can answer a multiple choice question. Is it Mary or Martha?
Yeah.
And they say, well, I don't want to tell why. I said, I'm not asking you. I just want you to tell me what your conclusion is. Would you go home with Mary or would you go home with Martha? And I ask everybody. And they say, Martha, Martha, Martha. Why? And okay, we finally get around. Why did you take Martha? So I'll have something to eat that day. That's why I chose Martha.
Yeah.
You know. And then once they've said Mary or Martha, then my follow-up question is, why did you choose Martha? And the fellow said, well, I want to get a good meal. I said, okay, that makes sense. Why did you choose Martha? Well, I choose Martha because I kind of identify with Martha. She's getting the job done, and that's the kind of woman I am. I get the job done. Then my next question could be, I do it a lot of different ways, but somewhere in there I say, you know what? And I want them to tell them this. I want you to watch my nonverbals while I'm talking. That's one good thing about Skype here.
Yes.
You can see my nonverbals. I don't just ask the question, but they've said, we'll take Martha, Martha. Let's say everybody in the circle says Martha, which is not unusual.
Yeah.
You may have one renegade say, I'll go with Mary. You know, okay. But if everybody says Martha, then I say, well, see, I'm pausing a long time. I'm fumbling. That's deliberate. That's not accidental. I said, why would you choose Martha when Jesus scolded her for what she did? And then it gets real quiet. And they say, and then sure as world, someone will say, well, I don't think he scolded her. I said, what did he do? If you don't call it scolding, what would you call it? Well, it's not scolding. I said, well, what is it? And somebody's going to say, well, I just got through with one last week, so I'll give you a quote. One woman said, well, we're on such good terms that he wouldn't take that as a scolding. I said, okay. I said, that's probably right. But now you mean tell me, now look up there, and I'd look up on the wall where I have the scripture written. I said, you mean tell me Martha comes in and she said, Lord, do you not care I'm in the kitchen serving by myself? That's an attack on Jesus, it looks like to me. Is that not an attack? And then she says, you tell Mary to get on in the kitchen. She's bossing him around. Now, you said that's just, they have that kind of nice relationship, yeah? Well, then what is he doing? He's scolding her? How about chiding? Well, no, I don't think. Finally, I say, okay, what is it? Well, now, you see, I hooked them into this problem by asking them which one they'd go home with.
Yeah.
But I'm really going down to the bottom where they're going to say, well, her priorities were wrong. That's why he jumped on Martha. Yeah. Her priorities were wrong. And then I say, I wonder, do we do that? Do we ever do that? So I said, for instance, if you invite someone over to your house that's not a Christian and you've kind of been studying with them, well, why do you invite them over? Well, to influence them spiritually. I said, okay, good. But if the husband, the dumb old husband, invites them over, and he tells his wife, I've invited him over tonight, And she's surprised. She will say, well, we can't have them over because, and then I look at the women in the group and I say, now what do we say next? Well, because the house is not clean. Okay, next one. What else? I don't have anything cooked. I have a meal, but I don't have a dessert. Oh, he said, no problem. I'll go by the bakery and buy a commercial pie. Oh, no, you said, we can't have a pie. And I said, why not? Well, it's because I didn't bake it. Now, what you see we're doing, and then I finally let them see it, they discover we're doing the same thing Martha did. We get so caught up and is the house clean, the meal ready, and everything perfect. And then if everything's perfect, we'll do something spiritual. But if it's not perfect, spiritual goes over the side. We abandon ship on it. So the beginning, asking questions is a very tough job, and you have to work at it a long time and get ready to go to your class. I don't just make up these things out of thin air. I go in and think about them, and then once I've got them hooked into the question, then all the rest of the lesson falls out in the process because of asking questions. But they're right. Most people just sit there and look back at you, but when you say it's Mary or Martha, which one you going home with? Well... And if they say, I don't know, that's okay. I say, fine. See, I got their first olive.
Yeah.
They said, I don't know. And then I say, well, Jim can't make up his mind. Mary, could you help him? Well, let me tell you, Jim's coming back to tell me what he thinks because he's not going to let Mary help him. He's not a dummy. He said, well, wait a minute. Now, what I do is I think I do this. Oh, okay. Now I got his olive. See, it came out of the bottle.
Yeah.
And once the olive's out, things start happening. That's a oversimplified version, but that's what happens.
And I heard you say in there, you find a question that everyone can answer. You find a question that has a hook into who they are, and you plan those questions in advance.
Absolutely. Now,
another thing.
If you watch, and let me say, if you watch me do it, you'd say, oh, man, that's just wonderful. You just sit down and great things happen. That's because it's planned. Go ahead.
How do you plan a question? That's not a skill a lot of folks have developed, but what goes into making a good question?
Well, the first thing you have to do is you got to study that lesson like your life depended on it, because
it does.
It does. You have to know it better than a lecture teacher, because other people are going to say things that you can't control, what they bring up. So you got to be ready for whatever they bring up. And so we call it, the planning of the question, we call it jumping the fat rabbit. And that's like a pack of hound dogs that run after a rabbit, and once they start, you can't call them back.
Right.
So groups are that way. Once they start down a road, you can't get them back. So you better be careful which road you start down. That's why that first fat rabbit question is very, very important. So you study the passage to say, what is this passage about? The passage in Mary and Martha, it's not about hospitality. That is not the lesson. In fact, you have to say, what did the Holy Spirit have in mind? Why did he leave this little story in here? Luke put it in. It's got to have some significance. It surely must have something for us. So what is it? And you get to looking at it, and you say, well, Jesus said, Mary has chosen the better part. He didn't say Martha chose the bad part, but he said this one's better. So you got to get bad, good, and better and best. You got to figure that out. How do I get there? Well, the way I get there is to get them to choose something innocent, so they'll have to think about what makes that work. And so when they choose Mary or Martha, they have chosen a whole series of things. If they choose Martha, even though we're not going to chide them about it, they choose Martha, they say, well, I'm thinking food. And besides that, I kind of identify with Martha. And you say, well, then that's right, I guess. If you identify with Martha, she's okay. Well, no, she's not okay. Well, what's wrong with her? Well, the rabbit we jumped is to start down the road choosing the person. As we choose the person, we choose the conclusions, and the conclusions make us justify. We have to justify our conclusions, and justifying conclusions is what makes discussion. And so they discover. Now the people, no matter which way they go, they discover what the passage is about. And finally, when you get to the end of the lesson, you should have come up with the idea of we need to prioritize our lives, and that's why it's there. That's the only reason. It's not to say how quickly can we see. Martha was focused on how quick to get the meal on the table on time. That was her top priority. We're going to serve Jesus and all these disciples, and we're going to get the meal on the table, and it's going to be on time, and everybody get in line and do what I tell them to, because that's the important thing. Jesus said, Martha, Martha, you're really distracted and troubled by a lot of things, but Mary's chosen the one thing that's needful. It's a better part. She's getting the message now. Now, do we always just sit down and listen to someone talk about the Bible and starve to death? Well, no. But what's wrong? And then I go a little deeper. What's really wrong with Martha? What's really wrong with her? And then by this time we got all the olives out of the bottle and everybody's going, and so we sit there and it gets quiet.
Yeah.
What's really wrong with Martha? What did Jesus challenge about? And his word. Then we go back and look at the text. The text says, "You are distracted. You are troubled about many things." That sounds a little bit like our lives. Distracted, troubled, and we miss the spiritual thing that Martha didn't see and Mary did. So, yeah, you sit down and you think a long time. And this is why, by the way, since you mentioned that, let me, of course, there's the book that you have, but I want to turn it sideways to see. That's how many books I have. There are 18 books here covering the New Testament. As I said, I wrote all these under protest because this is hard work.
Yes.
But if you're studying Romans, I've broken the passage down, Romans, into bite-sized discussion chunks, and then I've got you a fat rabbit question at the top of each lesson. So these are teacher's manuals.
Yes.
And so when you say, I can't think of the right question, maybe you'll find it here, maybe not. But this is the way. This has the question, and it has follow-up questions, and then it has a tentative conclusion. And so that's why I wrote these books, because people say, I can't remember my lesson. We discussed it, but I can't remember it till Sunday. So I wound up writing outlines. When I wrote the outlines, I had to write them week after week after week for 11 years.
Yeah. And
so I put them in volumes. And that's how I got there. Like I say, I wrote everything under protest.
Well, that's the best way to write, isn't it?
Yes. I felt a sense of mission, to say the least.
Yeah, and just so the folks at Burns know, we ordered a set of those books, and those books are on their way here, and they will be in the church library. If you guys are working on preparing a class, those would be great. A great place to go to. So, and no, he wasn't just a good salesman. I think those will be beneficial for us, and I've seen some. So I really look forward to that. One phrase you've used 3 or 4 times that I'd like to go back to, if that's okay, is helping them discover. In your book, you refer to it as discovery learning a few times. Can you elaborate on that concept for me a little bit, what it means to discover?
Well, public schools have been using that term, learning by discovery. The best way I can illustrate it is the role of the teacher, group discussion leader, facilitator, whatever you want to call him. He has to look at the lesson, and he has to decide what's in there, and then he's got to ask questions to get them to go dig around and get it. The best way I like to illustrate, I want to give you a picture, a mental picture, and that's, we all know about different kinds of bird dogs for hunting. One of them is a pointer, and the pointer just walks along in front of the hunter, and when he sees or knows there's a bird in the bush, he stops and he points his nose and it says, in essence, there's a bird in there, in that bush. And of course, if it flies, then he shoots. Well, the group leader is a pointer bird dog. So you don't say, when you get to a problem, you don't say, folks, if you look at verse 6, you're going to find the answer. See, Paul has said this. That's you telling them. They hear it, but they don't remember it very long. But if they're saying, well, I don't understand this, you say, well, and then you point, say, what do you think what light does verse 6 shed? And everybody goes, verse 6. Oh, and someone will say, well, there it is right there. He says so and so. Your job as the leader is to know it's in verse 6. The answer is in verse 6. But you don't tell them. You just point in there and say, how would verse 6 help us with that? Yeah. And the first guy will say, I don't see there's no help at all in verse 6. Next one says, I don't see anything either. I said, okay. And my joy is when I get a couple of men doing that. The reason I like women in the group, for the women who are watching this, is because women are more finely tuned in what they see. They see the smaller groups. And so after the men say, there's nothing there, that won't do it, no. Then I look at a particular woman who kind of uses a nonverbal and kind of shifts around on me, which means she's got something to say. And I said, well, Mary, tell me what you see there. And if I really want to get the guys turned on, I say, Mary, the men can't see anything. Could you help them see anything in that verse? Well, let me tell you, the first words out of Mary's mouth when she says something that they haven't seen, let me tell you, you've got attention like you've never had before. The people, they go, oh, well, yeah, I saw that, of course, Here they come. And then from then on, they don't profess ignorance so rapidly because the woman group helps them stay a little more open and honest about it. So it's wonderful to have men and women sitting there looking and talking and sharing.
What other benefits do you see in this discussion discovery method of teaching?
Okay. There's several things that I can enumerate. One of them, believe it or not, people learn and remember more than the other methods because they handle the information. Now, you say, well, I can't believe that. Well, we used to give tests, anonymous tests where nobody's embarrassed, but every time we'd finish a book, give a test, and we'd color code it so we knew who was lecture and who was group discussion, and then we'd average the two against each other. And after 10 years, we quit checking because we found that on the average, the group discussion people scored 10 to 15 points higher than the lecture group. Now, don't get me wrong, there were people in the lecture group that made 100 on the test.
Right.
But averaged out, the people who talked about the text remembered more. So that's number one. The second thing is, in addition to learning, people, I don't know other way to say this, they grow up in their Bible. They mature in Bible study. They quit saying to the teacher, okay, what does it mean? You tell me. And they begin to say, well, I can figure this out. And they become more independent, which is good. A third thing that is extremely good is that everybody gets to have fellowship while they have Bible study. In our lecture, we don't do that. We can't do it. It doesn't work. But when you sit at a table week after week and everybody at the table talks and everybody's relaxed and everybody's having a good time, everybody at your table, after a while, you know a lot about them because they reveal themselves. We all do. And so you get to do fellowship that you haven't had before. And then, of course, if you rotate tables, after 6 months, we'll say, then they get to learn a whole new set. They learn these 10, and then the next 6 months they'll learn these 10. Guess what? In a little while, they've been through the congregation, and they know people, all the people, and then they know the friends of those people, and you have a better congregation as far as fellowship. So it's a congregational development tool. And then the fourth thing that comes of this is that it's, for want of a better term, it's more persuasive. When people talk about things, they persuade themselves to do what it says. And the teacher gets an opportunity to say, do you do this? Well, you see in the lecture class, you just embarrass everybody. You say, it says here we ought to do this. Have you ever done this? What's your experience with that? And that's not threatening. They say, well, I tried that one time and I got my head blown off. And I said, well, listen, anybody else? Well, how did Jesus say do? Did we do it the way he said? Well, no, I didn't do it like that. Well, wonder what would have happened if you'd done it this way. So you actually get more change in people. I've seen people change right in front of your eyes in 30 minutes because they confront a scripture. I was in Nova Scotia years ago doing a seminar, and I had a scripture on the screen that we were going to study. And the preacher later told me, he said, boy, you had a couple in there, a married couple. They don't even believe that passage. And then he said, but you were really lucky because they bought into it in the discussion. I said, well, if you think I'm lucky, you weren't paying attention. I forced that situation. And what I did, they would say, well, this is how I feel. And I said, well, that's good. Look up there and tell me which part of the passage you got that out of. Where did you get that feeling? And the husband looked up there and immediately, a little while, he just said, oh, well, okay, yeah. And they'd say, well, I don't think that'll work. And I said, then Jesus was wrong? Is that what we're saying? Well, no, he's not.
Well, sorry about that. I guess the internet doesn't like us today.
Every once in a while it'll cut out.
It just cut out for some reason. Anyway, the
last thing I heard you say.
So,
oh, sorry. Okay. The last thing that we could hear on this end, I think you went away, was you were talking about the passage you had on the screen, and you asked the man, was Jesus wrong when he said this? That was the last we heard.
Okay. Well, and of course he had to answer then. He said, well, no, he wasn't wrong. And I said, well, was he right? You see, there's only two choices. And he said, well, yeah, he was. And I said, well, why would you say that? And he said, well, and then he began to really look at the passage. And it's powerful when you look at it and ask the right questions. So he did that. Well, he came over. He realized he was wrong. Yeah. And we lost your picture, but you're still there. I can hear you. Oh, there you are.
I still see you. Okay.
Good. As long as you can see me, that's important. I can talk to a blank screen. I'm used to that.
You got practice.
Yeah. So anyway, he came around and began to learn what was in the passage. And she kept hanging on to her prejudice like they'd always had. They just didn't want to see it. And finally she said, well, I just don't see so-and-so. And he sat across the circle from her, and he pointed at her. He said, I would never say this, but he looked at her and he said, look at the passage. And she said, what? He said, look at what it says. She looked up and she said, oh. And he got her attention, and it was amazing. But first I helped him discover it. Then he used his influence to help her discover. And even she had to come over him, and she was wildly prejudiced against the passage. She didn't want to believe it. But she found herself having to say, either Jesus is a liar or the passage is true.
Yeah.
And that's a very interesting. That doesn't happen often, but it happens to me because I do seminars where people don't believe in the system. Yeah. And so they do all kinds of things, which is really, really fun for me, but not for everybody.
How funny. Well, you've already shown us what potential this tool has. You gave us the 4 reasons just a few minutes ago. And you know, I think a lot of people have complained about discussion because they've seen it done poorly. And I suspect that's one of
Yes.
the major reasons they've seen it.
And let me tell you something too. When you want to talk about somebody who's against discussion, when they have poor discussion, I'm more against than anybody alive because I know it can be done right.
Yeah.
And most of the stuff that's done is a free for all. It's not a discussion. Doesn't have anybody guiding.
We've taken up quite a bit of your time already, but I guess can I close with one or two more quick questions?
Sure, go ahead.
If there was one thing you wanted a new discussion leader to know, what would it be?
The most besetting sin is talking. Most of us have been lecture teachers, and we talk too much. And I suggest to them, if they want to start off and they want to try to figure out how to keep from doing that, what you do is you go into your class and you can say a little introductory statement like, you know, I looked at the lesson today and I've got a bunch of questions. And then you ask questions and you can repeat back what they say, but you can't originate anything. You can't say, well, let me tell you what I think. We don't want to hear what you think. We want you to get other people to tell what they think and what they see and what the Bible says to them. So I would say have an observer, get your official observer to sit with you if you're a beginner, and let them watch how much you talk and tell you later. It'll horrify you, but let them tell you. And then when you start off and you say, I've read.
You just froze again. I don't know if you can hear me.
This passage today, and I know you have, but I've come away with some really interesting questions that I want to ask. Maybe you can help me with this. For instance, I looked at this. You hearing me?
Yes, I think it's caught back up.
Okay. So I just when I start that, I say, well, you know, I wonder if you had a chance to go home with Mary or Martha, which one would you go home with? And they'd say, well, they live in the same house. Well, that's okay, but if you had a chance to go home with one or the other, which one would you go with? And they say, well, I'd go with Martha. I said, good. What about you, Jim? Would you go with Martha or would you go with Mary? Well, I do this. Well, what about you? See, all those are questions.
Yeah.
And then if they say, well, we're all going with Martha, I said, good. Now, why did you choose Martha? And now I'm going to be really, really irritated. I'm going to say, Jesus didn't choose Martha. Why did you? See, that's provocative. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to provoke.
You're stirring the pot a little, I think.
To get them to think. And it doesn't make any difference where they start. We're going to ask questions. And so if you'll ask questions for the first 5 minutes, just hold your stopwatch. Don't make any statements of your own for 5 minutes, the first 5 minutes, then you'll be fine the rest of the time. But if you start off saying, well, let me make a little introduction here, and you talk for 15 minutes about Mary and Martha, you have made a mistake. You will never get a discussion now. You messed up. You must be quiet and only ask questions. And that's the besetting sin of beginning group leaders. Now, I have what I call a simple Simon way to start. There's a lot of variations when you get started, but it boils down to this. Number one, there are only 2 words you have to remember. And if you can't remember them, I tell them take a magic marker and write them in your hand so you can look at it as well. The first word is what. The second word is why. You ask the person, what do you think about going home with Mary and Martha? And they say, I'm going home with Martha. And then my next question is, well, why would you do that? And then you ask a whole bunch of questions. What, why, why. You don't have to remember much of that except those two words, what and why. That's the simple. And then once you ask the question, don't try to remember all the questions in the lesson that you're going to do. ask the first question, which kind of opens it up, and your memory will kick in at some point. But when they say, you say, here's my question, and they say, here's my answer, and then I say, why would you do that? And they say, this is my answer. Then I reach into the question, into the answer that they give me, and I find my next question. If you tell me, I'm going home with Martha because the meal will be on time, then I say, so that's really important, you think, in the scheme of things? Well, no, it's not really important. I said, but you decided that's what you do. Why would you do something that's not really important? You see, I'm using their own words against them. Now, I'm doing it benevolently. I'm not mad at them, not trying to make a fool of them. I'm just trying to get them to listen to what they're saying. They're choosing Martha for all the wrong reasons. And someone finally says, well, I'd go with Mary. Well, now you say, well, you're going to be happy now because they've said Mary. No, I'm still not going to be happy because I'm the facilitator. I'm going to say, Mary? Why would you choose Mary? You say, well, you surely know why they choose. That's not my problem. That's not my job. My job is to get them to think about it.
Yeah.
And they say, well, I'd go with Mary because I said, so you'd be willing to wait till 3 o'clock in the afternoon for lunch just so you could hear good spiritual discussion. Well, 3 o'clock may be a little much. Well, could you wait till 2? See, I'm just badgering them.
Yeah. Hey.
Are we coming back? Yeah, there you are.
Yes, sir. Don't you love computers?
Oh, I know. It's wonderful.
Roberts, thank you.
Yeah. Let me, for you, you have a last question? I was going to show you a chart here if we.
Feel free.
At the end.
That would be perfect.
Okay, I want to close out because, see if you can, is that clear enough?
It's clear. I can read it. Perfect.
Okay. This is a chart about educational statistics or theory, or whatever you want to call it. Everybody knows this chart, just nobody pays any attention to it. And what that means briefly is people, if they hear something one time, they remember 10% of what they hear a week later, which means they forget 90%. It's kind of startling. But if you tell them and show them a visual at the same time, that goes up to 50%. If you let them hear something and see something and then let them say something, that is, talk about it, it jumps 70%. So you gain 20 points talking, and that's not the teacher, that's the students talking. And then the last one, if you give them something to do, they hear, see, say, and do, they remember 90%. We're tapping in to this in discussion. You've told them, we always do that. We sometimes show them, but we don't let them talk. Well, we're losing 20 points right there if we don't let them talk. That's why this is persuasive, and it's why people remember it better. So that's a chart that...
I think the computers are trying to tell us something.
They are. They said they're getting tired. Okay, can you see the chart now? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so the information goes one way from the teacher to the students. That's lecture, that's what we've been doing for years. And nothing wrong with it, still works. This is what's called question and answer. Most people, let's see if I can get the...
There you go. You got the glare off it.
Most people call this discussion. Is Paul talking about baptism in Romans 6? Yes, thank you for that discussion. That's not discussion. That's question and answer. You only have discussion when the question goes out and multiple people start getting involved. That's discussion, and that's what you're doing. And I want them to see that clearly, because otherwise they're going to think if they do a question and answer like they've always done, that's discussion. But the thing has got to break loose where the people voluntarily begin to talk to each other and take the problem, take the passage, and begin to solve it.
Absolutely.
That's what makes it happen. Anyway, I appreciate doing this. This is probably experimental on our
Yes.
part to see how well this works, and so you'll have to report back to me and tell me how it went.
Absolutely. I'll let the people know how to get in touch with you too if they want to send me hate mail or send you love letters. So.
Okay. Very good.
I really, again, appreciate your time. I think this is something that'll benefit us and serve us well. And I know you're a busy man, both of you. And just thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see you later.
Talk to you soon. Take care.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye. For the sake of time, that was a long clip, I know. But just a couple of things. He gave some benefits. He talked about some of his preparation, but one of the things that got cut out of the clip there that you didn't get to see is the method that they used, which is an interesting one. On Wednesday night, they have a Wednesday night teacher's training class where he teaches a class about what the material is. You know how you and I just basically sat through his lesson on Mary and Martha, even though we weren't sitting through his lesson on Mary and Martha? Mm-hmm. He does that every Wednesday night for the Sunday school teachers who are teaching on Sundays. So he teaches them, and then they teach on Sunday, and they use this material. That's an interesting approach because of what it does to the list we've got up here. As I did some reading through this stuff, and as I listened to his interview and looked up some papers and all that sort of stuff, I pretty well come to the conclusion that our list is garbage, our whole list, because none of it's true. It's like you said, big picture. When somebody says, I don't want to talk, they're lying. They're telling you the truth because they don't want to talk here now in these circumstances. Everybody wants to say something to somebody. And if there's a way that some of those circumstances can change, well, maybe. If the pro of lecture is you get lots of information, but the con is they might not remember it, well, you didn't get lots of information. And if the pro is you have control, but really you can't tell if they're paying attention, you can't tell if they're involved, and they're not telling you when they don't understand something, you don't have that. And if your goal is for them to learn and process and be confronted by the text and they don't ask questions, you don't have that. And, okay, you can look at everybody, but is that really such a good thing? I mean, you see what I look like. It's not pretty up there some Sundays. Everybody can smile, and most people can stay awake half an hour. That doesn't say a lot. And down here, just because you're in a discussion class, it doesn't mean you're going to actually discover anything if you don't want to, or if the teacher doesn't help you. And, you may or may not retain something. And, if it is just pooling ignorance, well, those cancel each other out. And immediate feedback, well, what if that feedback's no good? Now, I'm marking out the list a little bit facetiously, but you can go through all of these things and kind of say, well, that's not necessarily the case, or it is the case, or if you're teaching a lecture the right way, you should be getting feedback because you're watching the students. You know what you've anticipated questions. You see, I see that. And I know that we are 5 minutes away from a break, by the way. So stay with me 5 more minutes. I see you doing it right now. If I'm doing a good job with a lecture, I think, if I were Jeff Coombs, what question would I have? If I were Butch, where would he disagree? If I were Leanne, what would she think this stupid old guy's doing? Put yourself in their place. I've heard lecture classes where there is no control because the teacher just gets up and starts rambling. And even if you do it with the Bible, it's not real helpful. Well, verse 1 says this, verse 7 says this, I'm done. That's not effective. No plan or goal, that's not the fault of the method. That's the fault of the teacher completely. If you heard anything from the first session, have a plan or a goal. I don't care how you're teaching. Preparation, well, do we ever ask our students to be prepared? I hope we do. We try to. But if we don't, is it their fault that they're not? Not really. One of the reasons I like to give homework in classes, on Sunday morning, we have 45 minutes, theoretically. because sometimes I'm late and sometimes a lot of our people are late, and because there's usually an announcement or a prayer, we start 5 minutes late pretty much every time. And depending on who's ringing the bell, sometimes that bell rings a little bit early. I'm not naming any names, Walter Lee, but sometimes that bell rings early. So maybe you lose another 5 minutes at the end. We're down to 35 minutes. 35 minutes. And if I can get you to go home and do a little bit of homework for 15 minutes, I've gotten us back up to what we should have had in class. You come to class prepared, you learned something on your own, you studied on your own, then you come to class with some information. You can make something out of that. A good lecture can use different styles. We've used a lot of discussion, but these teacher training things have been primarily lecture. I've shown you pictures, I've made you do things, I've asked questions, I've given you food that buys brownie points. We've hit different styles. You can pay attention to feedback. So what I'm kind of getting at is it's not so much the method, it's how you implement the method. Let me show that to you a couple different ways. By the way, I cut him off before he said this, but these are pretty well accepted and documented numbers. People remember 10% of what they hear. What was on the news this morning? What did you talk about last night? Okay, you don't remember that stuff well or long. You do a little bit better with what you read. I remember the newspaper more than I remember Dimitri Kalodimos. I don't have a clue who was on the news last night. You remember much more of what you see. And if you see it and read it and hear it, that's the reason the internet with video and TV has killed the newspaper. Because the newspaper thinks we can get you with what you read. That's why radio companies are buying each other left and right, trying to figure out how to make a buck. Because it's hard to get anywhere with just what you hear. This is called the learning pyramid. Educators are big on pyramids. I think they got abducted in Egypt or somewhere. But this is a pretty well documented and pretty well accepted figure. But generally the retention rate for each type of learning falls out this way. This is a generally accepted number. If you just hear something in a lecture, someone just says, the capital of Nebraska is Nashville. 5% of you remember that. Or you remember 5% of that. If you read it, 10%. So by me giving you homework, I double, kind of, what you might remember. If I show it to you, like with an image or with an object or a display, we go up to 20%. I like that pattern, that direction. If I demonstrate it, you remember more. If Leslie teaches a chemistry lab, the students hear about it, they go, huh? What were all those chemicals? What was all that math? They read about it, they get a little bit more. They see the PowerPoint at the beginning of her lab presentation, and then they do it. And they watch her do it. What do you know? Surprise, surprise, it starts to stick with them. Leslie, would you tell the story about nylon?
Okay, so I have a group of boys that are very entertaining. They keep me on my toes. So they were making, it was a 5th grade lab essentially, where, did you ever make slime or DAC or any of that? So they made slime, silly putty, bouncy balls, I mean rubber balls.
How come we didn't do that in my school?
Everything that you can touch and feel, like everything, after they made it, they'd have to answer questions, they'd have to touch it and feel it. The last one, they had to make nylon, so like nylon pantyhose, they had to make it. So very clearly in the lab it says, do not touch it with your hands. Do not touch it, like twice. So the boys are over here and I'm like, do not touch it. And they're like, can we touch it please? It says do not touch. There's a reason. You see this bottle, it's hexane. Those give you cancer, bad for you. They're like, can we touch it? Okay. I'm like, whatever. So these boys are over here playing in the nylon, touching this chemical, it's bad for them. So at the end of the demonstration, I make them work out the formula for it. So they're working out the chemistry behind how to create nylon. H comes from one element, Cl comes from the other, so they're making hydrochloric acid, and they were touching it. So at that point, I think it probably stuck really well with them because they're all looking at their hands now going, we should have listened to her.
Are we going to die?
I'm like, it's okay, you're not going to die. But they're over here going, and they all all ran to wash their hands.
Sometimes you learn lessons different ways, and that's just sort of an example of this. Things you discuss, you tend to remember. Debates, you remember. When you argue with somebody about something, you tend to remember it. By actually doing something, you tend to remember more of it. Growing up, Dad made me watch him change the oil. It was just the time I had to lay on my back under the car and get dirty. I didn't like it. But then when he made me start doing it, after the first few times I dumped hot oil all over myself, I started paying attention. It's funny how that works. And one of the things that's hard about teaching in church is some of the things are here and now. Here's how you live. And some of the things are the hereafter. And it's hard to give people a view into heaven that you can't see with these eyes. But that's part of what we're doing. Teaching others, according to this data, is the way that people remember the most. You know why I'm so excited to have so many teachers at Burns? Because you're going to know material better than anyone else. Well, that's one of the reasons I love teaching. That's one of the reasons I went into ministry. I figured it was going to keep me on the straight and narrow. By having to spend the time to teach, you really learn. If you present something to somebody, you tend to know it pretty well. You and I tend to think about a lecture class, and we tend to think of something like this, a big room, the Sunday auditorium class, where everybody just kind of stares at one person presenting. And the average lecture does kind of go something like that. There's a guy standing at the front of the room, and he just starts talking, and in the church setting, he says, here's what the Bible says. And there is great benefit in this if it's done right. But in this way, where it's just me telling you what it says, don't call that a Bible study. Don't call that a Bible class, because you're lying. You are the only one that studied. You are telling them the results of your study. It's not a study. Now, if you want a study, that's something different. That's something different altogether. When we do it that way, we've pretty much become like the churches of the 17 and 1800s, where the Bible is chained to the pulpit and the teacher is the sole authority. And we're not a big fan of that. A better lecture puts the Bible in the hands of everybody and encourages them to go to it and encourages them to learn from it and look in it and search from it and make the discoveries themselves. The best lecture puts the Bible at the center of the conversation rather than the teacher in the center of the conversation. And the teacher makes his job to get the students to go to the Bible and makes his job to get the students to ask questions of the Bible. And he helps that happen. That can happen in a lecture. It can happen in a discussion. It can happen in a video. It could happen in a puppet show. It doesn't matter where you do it. It's how and what you do. I've kind of categorized 4 categories of teaching. It is levels of participation, basically. No participation is sort of what you guys had in mind when you described a lecture. And that's what a lot of lectures are. But I don't think that's what lectures are supposed to be. It's just, I have a script, I'm going to read you my script, we're done. Frankly, if you're going to do that, give me the paper that you're going to read from, because I'll remember twice as much of that anyway, and I can read faster than you can talk, and I don't have to get up in the morning to do it. See how that's... There is benefit in it, though, because of the volume of what you can get across. If you can get twice as much information across and they remember half as much, you end up in the same place. What I'm trying to tell you is the different methods, there's not a cure-all, there's not one that is good, there's not one that's bad. It's about using each one the best way. An example of teaching without participation would be a lecture. The pro would be that you could get lots of information across. A pro would be that it works well for large classes. A pro would be that there's not a large risk of getting sidetracked unless you do it to yourself. Sometimes you can be your own worst enemy. The cons, the retention is bad. The con is unless you do a lot of work, it's not very interesting. Another con is that the teacher is responsible for all content. That's a big burden to bear. And the final con is it's not real persuasive. When an ad comes on television, 9 times out of 10, it isn't a guy standing there saying, you should buy a Ford truck because Ford trucks are more economical, more reliable, the end. They may say those things, but it's not one person telling you, oh viewer, you should listen and you should buy this. They show you pictures of Ford trucks flying off of cliffs, being loaded with gravel, bouncing up and down with a rugged guy in it and a good-looking girl. And the voiceover guy says those things. They're doing something very different there. So that's one model. The second method of teaching is direct participation. So we first have no participation, then we have direct participation. In a kids class, it looks like this. Crafts. That's why we do crafts with kids. We let them get their hands into it. Or a chemistry lab, where you do experiments to learn. Or when you call a kid to the board to write an answer to a math problem. Don't think that stuff is limited to grade school. You could actually do that in a Bible class, I think. It's possible. Or even just the simple asking questions and having people respond that way. The pros of this method are it keeps students on their toes. It's harder to sleep if you think I might call on you, Butch.
Thank you.
It's harder to daydream if you think that you're part of what's going on. And if you have permission to interrupt me and say, Matthew, this doesn't make any sense at all, it is less likely you're going to go the entire class not having a clue what I'm talking about. The pros would also be it promotes thinking, it has better retention, and it has feedback. You can do this even in a lecture-style class just by incorporating a few questions. The cons are, it's not always appropriate for every scenario. I can't have you doing crafts in here. That wouldn't really fit with what we're trying to do. When I preach, it's not really appropriate to do questions and answers in the middle of a sermon. So if I'm going to do this, I have to make it happen inside your head. I have to get in your head. Isn't that scary? Ugh. You don't want to go in mine. It's a dark, dark place. It's not appropriate for every scenario, and it takes time to prepare. We've talked about fat rabbits, olives, and pointers. Didn't think we were going to talk about those today, did you? But those things don't happen accidentally. The third method is indirect participation. This one is kind of kin to the last one, except instead of me involving you directly, I involve you indirectly. Mr. Rogers is the best example of this that could ever be. You remember that bear? You remember the bear's name? Daniel Bear. Daniel Bear. Do you remember he would have conversations with that bear that would, anybody else, you'd call him schizophrenic or a sociopath or something. But you remember he'd have conversations with the bear about going to the doctor or going to the playground. Now, if you tell a kid, oh, a shot, it's not going to hurt, they look at you and say, you're in with the doctor, aren't you? But when he tells Mr. Bear that the shot's not going to hurt, Mr. Bear believes him, the kids actually believe him because he's not telling them that, even though he is. It's an indirect form of communication. This happens. You remember a time when Nathan the prophet told a story? He said, what if there was a guy, a rich guy, who had all sorts of stuff, and there was this poor guy that lived next to him, and he just had this one little lamb, and what if the rich guy stole the poor guy's lamb and killed it so he didn't take one of his own? What'd you say about that? Now, this isn't David's story. This is somebody else's story. So David says, of course, kill him. That's wrong. That's horrible. That's bad. Don't do it. That was an indirect story that he then turned around to a direct point. Hey, David, that's you. You're that guy. You're the man. Oh. If Nathan had walked in and said, David, I'm here to talk to you about your adultery, fornication, and murder. Can I have an appointment with you? He might have ended up on the front line too. I don't know that he would or wouldn't have, but I think he was wise in using the method that he used. This is sometimes when you show people something. I showed you my conversation with Robert Oglesby so that you could hear some of the questions that went through my mind and how he responded, so you could observe. This is how advertisers really like to act. They don't say your Ford truck will make you happy. They show someone happy in a Ford truck. Budweiser doesn't say we will make you feel good. They will show two people whose only concern in life is whether it's less filling or better tasting. And indirectly, they're trying to tell you that their product is best. Advertisers love this one. This is what most advertising in the 90s and 2000s has been. But thanks to technology and the internet, that has changed. You hear people talk about social networking and all that stuff. Now that technology has made it where people can participate directly with the advertiser, indirectly by watching people, and then with each other as a group, it's changed everything. Everybody's got a Twitter or a Facebook. Go online and join the conversation. You hear that buzzword? Or a lot of people said one of the reasons that Barack Obama was elected president was because he had a better way of connecting with the young people via this. And I'm not saying that Sunday school has to have a Twitter account. I'm saying that this method of group participation is powerful. It combines direct and indirect presentation. It lets them get lecture material, participate, and work on it. Maybe make a presentation to another group. Effectively, that's what we're doing here. I'm trying to help us become better teachers so that you will help the rest of the church, and when we do that, we'll do better, I think. A great level of retention, expression, and involvement. There are cons, though. You don't have as much control, so you have to plan for that. You have to plan extra hard. If you are going to teach a lecture, you need to plan very hard to make sure you anticipate what people are thinking, anticipate their objections, are speaking to their level, and are watching very closely the nonverbal clues to make sure that you are making any sense at all. You've got to do a lot of work. If you're going to do something that is more discussion-based, you've got to do a lot of work too. You've got to figure out how to get them back on track, how to manage the relationships that are happening in the room, how to deal with somebody who says something crazy. The hardest thing in the world for me to figure out what to deal with is somebody says, well, there's this verse that says such and such, such and such, such and such. Well, I don't have all of them memorized, so it's a little bit hard for me to say, I'm absolutely certain that verse does not exist. I usually say, find that for me and let me know when you do. That doesn't have quite the same effect. There's difficulties that come because of this. But the point is, wherever you are, whichever model you're teaching, even if it's you in the world's largest auditorium, get inside their heads and make that happen. Figure out how to make them engage Scripture, engage others, get the gears turning, make it move a little bit. I think it'd be a good time to take a break. What about you? Let's do that, 5 or 10 minutes, and we will wrap up after that. Thank you.
Oh, aren't you stuck? You gotta keep working.
Thing up. Thank you again. Mentioned earlier, I have one copy of Robert's book. It's a neat book. I like books with short chapters. It's a very short book. It's only 95 pages. But just look at some of the chapter titles. Problem Students. That looks like you, Keith.
Picture of Keith in there.
How do you get that? How to limit the scope of a lesson. This chapter I liked. So your group won't study. And no, there's not a magic cure in here that all of a sudden everyone starts studying, but he's got some ideas. His stuff isn't perfect. Nobody's is. But I think it'll help you a lot. One of the things that's neat and unique about his book at the beginning, the first chapter of the book is just a script of an imaginary Sunday school class using his method. And it goes wrong in 2 or 3 places, as Sunday school classes frequently do. And it kind of shows how he deals with it. And then he talks about how it all works. Again, we'll have this in the library. Jeff and I have talked a little bit too. At some point in the next couple of months, probably, it'll probably be May by the time it can happen. But May, we'll get it figured out at some point. But sometime in the future, we'll do a day where those of you who have laptops and want to bring it, we'll do how to use some of the free Bible software and websites together, just to kind of orient you to that, and then show some of the stuff that's in the library and that too. His set of books, I've only looked at 1 or 2 of them in the past, are neat. They're short little books like this that go through all of the books of the New Testament. And like you said, he gives you his fat rabbit question and 2 or 3 other questions and 2 or 3 pointers. And it's just an interesting reference, because sometimes when I get started, I think, Sunday school, the lesson title for Sunday school tomorrow is Soli Deo Gloria, because I thought that would catch your attention more than to God alone be the glory. And I think, how in the world can I get it into our hearts that God is the only one who deserves credit, honor, and glory for anything? It's not hard for me to get that into your heads. True or false, class? God alone deserves the glory. Everybody's going to say true. But what's a lot harder is Monday, Matthew giving God the glory. So how do I help that happen? How do I make that happen on Saturday? How do I make that happen on Sunday? I've got to think about stuff like that. So I think it's a good thing to read some of those guides and just let it help you as you look. So this will be in the church library, as will those books. And Leanne has done a good job getting us started on cataloging the library. It's probably 20%. I think that's about right. I don't know. Church libraries are hard because, there's like the Dewey Decimal System and the Library of Congress and all that stuff in school that I never really knew where I was going. I just found a librarian and asked. But churches have such a unique set of books. It's hard to find stuff. So she's working on this list where you can search it on the computer. On some of them, you can even see the picture of the cover of the book. If you're blind like me and you can look at the same shelf for 10 minutes but not find the book that was 6 inches away the entire time. It's a neat thing. It's a helpful thing. Again, just to back up, I'm not trying to tell you that every class needs to be discussion, every class needs to be lecture, every class needs to have a craft, every class needs to have a song. I'm just trying to broaden your mind to think about how can I use the ingredients that accomplish my goal. You remember the first session we talked about having a goal? If you've got a goal, how can I serve my goal? Sunday morning, how can I get you leaving with a resolved commitment to live saying, to God alone be the glory? How can I do that? And that's what I'm going to work on. Am I going to do that perfectly Sunday? No, but we'll work on that sort of thing. Here was my models of teaching chart if you missed anything, but you could probably make it up just about as well as I could. The different categories, the different pros, the different disadvantages as well. And again, some of these things are more appropriate for other scenarios than others.
Will these be on the church website?
Sure. That's a great idea. Yes. It will probably be next week sometime, but I'll make these available. We'll also probably put these in the church library too, just so that they're all there. I'd like to see us use that resource more in the coming years. Church libraries gather dust too quickly.
We need to make room one day to have that library over here.
I think so too, great idea.
Sometime we need to get it,
Very good.
figure out a way to get it over here. If we have to move the classroom
Yeah.
over there, that people can walk. Because nobody's going to walk over there and use that room.
Yeah, not on a Sunday. Not on a Sunday. So, but I will make this. The people who are in this room pretty much all have keys, just about. We can let you in anytime you want. I'm supposed to have posted office hours yet, but I'm still trying to figure out what the best time to invite people to come see me is. James said, don't post all the hours you're going to be there. There will always be people and you'll never get anything done. I said, well, that's a good point. So I've tried to figure out when that is. But pretty much Monday to Friday, I'm in here most of the day. Call me and I'll make sure you can get in if you want in, if you don't have a key. A couple more things. In the last chapter of his book, he gives 10 commandments for discussion leading. Let's go over these real quickly. Number 1, make careful physical arrangements. I used to think this was the dumbest, hokiest thing ever. And then I tried an experiment once when I was teaching. I taught week 1, week 2. Week 1, I had the chairs kind of in a V shape where everyone could kind of see each other. I didn't do the full circle. And then week 2, I had them in lines. And the difference in the energy in the class, the participation when I'd ask a question, was insane. And it sounds silly, and you feel a little bit silly saying it matters which direction people are facing, but it really kind of does. That's in the auditorium. That's a little bit of a problem with pews.
James hates
That makes them harder. It's also hard because there aren't places you can take notes. And if you're giving a lecture where you're conveying a lot of information, you're sitting in a pew and you've got your Bible on one knee and a piece of paper on the other, and you're trying to figure out how to balance all those things. It's not really ideal, but it's what we've got, so we work with it. If the pews ever die, I'm going to fight hard for something else, but that's what we've got. If you're going to teach discussion, don't lecture. Well, that seems obvious, but that's really hard to do, especially if you're used to lecturing. I probably break this rule more than the rest of them combined. Oglesby's suggestion for dealing with this is make yourself a commitment and say it when you walk in that you have 25 seconds to introduce and set up, and then you will do nothing except ask questions. You will not say anything except a question. What does verse 3 say? What does that mean? Did you notice anything about this word? Does anyone disagree with that statement? Because it's wrong. You can do a lot with questions. And as you will notice in Sunday mornings, our next sermon series is the questions of Jesus. He did a lot with questions. Funny thing. Number 3, ask questions. Who would have thunk it? Questions are powerful. Number 4, listen. There is a temptation when you teach, you ask a question, your mind immediately goes to, okay, what am I supposed to do after I get done with this question? And that's a natural temptation, but you've got to fight that temptation, or you're not going to listen to what they say, and you're not going to be able to use that information. Praise your students when they say things. Reward them. Now, I'm a little bit mean. I like to give you a hard time and tease. But it would be better if you make it known that you appreciate comments. If you're looking for comments, appreciate comments. If you're not looking for comments, don't. Encourage teamwork. Instead of letting yourself be the referee of everything, well, Leslie said that about the lab. Butch, do you have an experience about that? Try to get you guys to work with each other. Number 7, serve the group. Your job is there to help them learn. It's about them. Number 8, summarize often. So Jeff, did I understand you to say that you think that the library would be better off here in this building because you think that no one will walk over there? Okay, I did. And it's amazing how summarizing like that, Oglesby did it in his presentation, gives you a lot of chances to diffuse time bombs. And it also lets you be a little bit sneaky in dealing with situations. So is Jesus wrong when he said, love your neighbor and your enemy? Huh? Pray for your enemy? Did he? Of course not. But we act like he is sometimes. Ask those questions. Summarize often. Handle problems. They don't go away on their own. Confession, I tend to try to take the passive-aggressive approach sometimes. It's because I'm a chicken and I don't like confrontation. That's not good. I need to work on that. But when there's a problem, deal with it. It doesn't go away on its own. And I think this may be the most important piece of advice in the whole list. Draw a conclusion, a scriptural conclusion in the last 5 minutes. Bring it together. Like you said, if you throw out that fat rabbit question, the dogs all start following in one direction. And every once in a while, a few of the dogs will take off another direction. In fact, again, you could probably name names of people who like to bring up things that don't seem like they're related at all, but they are to that person. Bring it back together with those summaries. Washington University, I wish Bill Surratt were here so he could hear someone's actually quoting Washington University in something, has a Center for Instructional Development, and these are the guides that they give their new college professors. They say that good discussions are prepared in advance. Oglesby said that too, didn't he? He said that if you're going to teach, you probably should have some questions. He wasn't lucky. He made it happen. You remember things like that? What are your goals? What question can you ask to advance those goals? Will your students be prepared to answer? Don't be upset that your students don't answer if there's no way they've known the answer. If they haven't read it, how can they know the answer? If you just ask random general Bible questions without time for students to prepare, you've basically just become a trivia show where your students who've been in the church the longest can show off. That's not the environment we're trying to foster. Give them a chance. Think about what they know. Good discussions are purposefully led. They are guided. You avoid chasing those rabbit tails. It's okay to say, I don't think that's what we're trying to do today. Or, let's get back to the subject. Or, the question was X, not this. Ask follow-up questions. Pause. Give time to think. Write down key answers. That's a strong reinforcing tool. If you use the whiteboard or if you use PowerPoint, you've gone from just hearing something to seeing it. And if you want to get another student involved because your handwriting's as bad as mine, you can get them to write it and one more person's involved, and you've increased your ability to remember and involve people without a whole lot of extra work. A couple more. Good discussions are assessed. What did you think about his idea what they did testing the students for 10 years. Have you ever had a Sunday school test? I can't remember the last time.
Good idea.
I think it is, isn't it?
Bible, yeah.
That works as one. You guys get a test every week, probably 2 or 3 a week sometimes towards the end. And those tests are good for you guys because they help you learn answers. They're also good for me because it tells me, oh, that's funny, they don't know anything from chapter 22. Huh, let's go back. They teach a lot of ways. There's a saying that if you can't measure it, it didn't happen. Now, I can't put on a chart, percentage discipleship of Christ arranged. Congratulations, our church has a spiritual quotient of 9.3. You can't quantify it, but you can measure things. It's good to ask questions. It's good to measure.
Something that I'd like to do is hand out a note card at the end of class and have them write down something they learned and then something they're still fuzzy about. Because then I can say, okay, they learned this. Was that my main point? Okay, good. Or, ooh, they're still fuzzy on that, and that was my main point. Then it kind of helps me know what I did wrong.
There's a difference between learning in a school situation.
Certainly.
And a church situation, and you don't want people to be inhibited.
No. And one of the things that is difficult about a church situation, in a school, if you're teaching the 4th grade, you've got 4th graders. There's some that are doing better and some that are doing worse, but by and large, you've got 4th graders. And they're within, grand total, maybe a 3-year age spread, maybe 4 somehow if it's rough. At church in the auditorium class, I have a 80.
Worse this quarter because of me, so let's not look at this quarter.
An 80-year spread. Now, even if it weren't for having the teens in there, that would drop it to a 70-year spread. And there's some people in that room who have been a Christian 2 weeks. And there are people in that room who have been Christians 2 of my lifetimes. That's a hard thing. Yeah, I'm not saying that we need to do Scantron tests, and I'm not saying we need to post the grades at the back of the classroom. I'm not saying it even necessarily has to come in the form of a test, but we do need to kind of look for measurements to see how we're doing. Something I have a love-hate relationship with doing is walking through the auditorium on Monday and looking at the bulletins. It's really fun, by the way. You should do it sometime. And read the Pew Notes page. By the way, sometimes you learn some fun things about people that way. It amazes me sometimes the things that I think I said 23 times don't get filled in. The things I had on the screen with giant arrows toward the flashing lights and a siren, sometimes people don't get. And sometimes what they do get, I didn't say that. Or sometimes they write the wrong point down. Oh, man. But it's a good learning thing. Does anybody outside of this room know that I do that every once in a while? Probably not. Now you're going to start throwing it off by leaving fake Pew Notes behind, aren't you?
Yeah.
I knew you, Keith. That's something that, that's just one little way. Look for ways to evaluate how it's gone. I think if you're doing a long church class, it isn't inappropriate to get some written feedback directly. If you're teaching one Sunday, I think it might be a little bit weird to do a mid-course evaluation or something. But look for clues. Use discussions to lead to more discussions. Now, I don't think this necessarily applies to directly in class, but one of my goals when I teach, if I teach something on Sunday, and if I can have you talking about it at lunch, I have made a victory. It has been a good day. Even if you're disagreeing with it a little bit, it's sort of a victory because by lunch you still remember what I've talked about and you're still grappling with it. That's a good thing. Give people a place to go. And like Connie said, this isn't school, this is church. And if I can talk about Jesus in such a way on Sunday morning that by Sunday afternoon you're still talking about him that way, that makes it a lot easier for you to tell somebody about him. That's what I'm trying to do. That's what you're trying to do. I want the little kids in a Sunday school class to say, we did this craft yesterday about Jonah, and he was in the belly of a big fish 3 days, and God took care of him. It just sort of spills out, and that's the sort of thing that we want. So when we talk about discussion classes, discussions work best with prepared teachers who ask planned questions, alliteration, you know how preachers have a weakness for this stuff, to students who have prerequisite knowledge. They have done something in advance, you have done something in advance, and because of what you've both done, you can do something together. But the point of all of this is, no matter what format you use, plan to know what's going on in your students' minds. Plan to connect. Help them study and own the material.
You were talking about the age difference in the classes and the difference in maturity of being a Christian. I went through the same thing right here.
Yeah.
When I first became a Christian, I was not knowledgeable at all in the Bible. Matter of fact, I came down for months and sit in John Gabriel's teenage class because I actually could learn more there because what was being taught upstairs was over my head. And it's weird now, I'm teaching a class on Wednesday night and I'm still having to read some stuff for Sunday morning's class. I didn't know near as much about Joseph as a lot of people did when we started on Sunday mornings. So I had to read your homework or I would know what you were talking about on Sunday mornings, actually.
Well, that's the goal. And by the way, my homework took me a long time to do this week too, by the way. If you haven't done it yet, do it.
And when you're in the church 20 years, you'll still be doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Well, that's probably...
You'll be doing it, you'll be worth thinking you don't have enough knowledge, there's people in the class that know more than you do, and you worry that you're not studying hard enough to be ready for the Sunday school class. That'll be 2 years from now, 10 years from now, and hopefully 40 years from now.
But if you keep reading that Bible at home and learning, that's the best work you can do.
Thought my phone was ringing.
God bless you, Dad.
Absolutely. And Sunday school is a challenging thing, but it is such a rewarding thing. We're going to skip this session, but I just want you to think about this. Well, who is your favorite group to teach? Jeff, who's your favorite age group or group in general that you've ever taught?
Seniors, young adults.
Okay.
Would be.
You mind going around the room, Randy?
Well, I've helped with Sunday school quite a bit on the teenage boys, and I've enjoyed them.
Okay. Butch?
I don't know if I have a favorite.
Okay.
Because you get kind of a different challenge from every group.
Yeah.
But I have enjoyed the adults always.
I hate them.
So, I didn't want to make them mad. I didn't want class bad on Wednesday night.
Man, see if I'm coming to his
That's
class
what I
again.
like about the adults, they come there opening up and talking.
Yeah.
Or a lot of times the kids don't say as much, but I just enjoy being around them.
Yeah.
Sunday mornings.
Leanne, help your teacher out on Sunday morning. Bridget, help your teacher out on Sunday morning. Leslie?
Adults or teenagers.
Okay. I'm going to skip. No. Bridget, do you have a favorite class you'd like to teach? Sevens? Okay. Leg hand?
Like Heisman and Mike and Buck's.
Okay, very good. They're second, third grade. Is that about right? Okay. Juanita?
I taught from the cradle roll up to the ladies, and each class I was teaching, I thought, this is the best class in the whole church to teach. And just last quarter, teaching the teenage girls, that was so precious. I got far more out of it than I know they did.
Oh, well. Keith?
The adult class.
Okay.
Because they're willing to help you out.
Yeah.
If I get stuck, there's somebody, Lynn,
Yeah.
that can always
Bail you
help
out.
me out.
Sandy?
First, second, third, up.
Connie?
Well, I'll tell you the least favorite is the younger ones.
Okay. Amen, sister.
You gotta be able to talk and know what I'm saying.
Nowhere in my Bible classes at Freed Hardeman they talk about changing diapers. I'm just saying. Glenn?
Probably adults.
Yeah. I really enjoy adults. Teens are probably my second favorite. I like them when they get old enough that they're smart alecky, and when I shoot back, they can deal with it. First graders, I'm just not good that way. And part of that has to do with my learning styles and where my intelligences are. The things that work really well for little kids, those are the areas that I'm pretty well deficient in, by and large.
Pam right here. She'd say little kids.
She likes the little kids.
Yeah.
And the all wisdom and stuff. So.
And thank goodness, thank the Lord for those teachers, because that is a hard job. And we need to make sure people know that. It's not just babysitting for half an hour. Even in the bucket class, it's not babysitting for half an hour. There's a routine, and those routines teach a lot. Even if the only lesson, and I don't think this is the only lesson, but even if the only lesson is how to be respectful during prayer by being quiet, that's a lesson a lot of people don't learn for a long time. If you can teach that lesson to the bucket class and to the terrible twos, you've really done the church a service. So don't make light of those things. We each had different reasons for the classes that we liked. I like adults because they can ask hard questions. I like teens because they surprise me. You never know exactly what they might come up with in a teen class. There are difficulties, though. Chip said Thursday night after we were done, he said, in an adult class, if the students get bored, they go to sleep. In a teen class, if they get bored, they start causing problems. Those are different, aren't they? I'm not sure what happens in a first grade class, but again, I think it might involve poop, so we're trying to stay away from that. Think about the things that work for you, and think about the strengths that you have, and work in there. What I want to do for our last thing is, again, kind of walk through. We all good?
Get your rides on the way.
Very good. Walk through the application of a Bible class. And since Jeff is our Sunday school czar, this is his face. You've had this conversation, haven't you? I need you. The way the conversation usually goes with me is, you can't say no today. Give me a week to think about this. But we really need somebody, and I think you'd be good at this. And I try to make a point of not asking somebody that I think wouldn't be. I told Myra when we asked her to teach the 3rd through 5th graders, I think that'd be a group you'd be good at, but if I'm wrong and you don't want to, we're not going to disfellowship you. And Randy says the reason we ask him to teach classes is because he has sucker written on his forehead. But I don't think that's true. Do you guys think that's true? I don't think that's true. I think it's because he does a good job. And Randy has a different point of view coming to the church later. And it's true that, Randy, your Bible knowledge and Glenn's may not be on the same today.
Not close.
But in 20 years, I don't know. In 10 years, I don't know. But you have something special by being new to this, saying, I know what this is like. And there's a lot of people in the room. And as the church grows, and if the church is growing, there will always be more people who are young Christians than old Christians. So you have a gift to be able to relate to those people in a very special way. And that's an important ingredient. Because you're teaching, there's somebody who doesn't have to go to the teen class to get the level that's ready for them. So that's a gift, and that's why it's good that you teach, and I hope that you enjoy it. I'm sorry I'm picking on you, but you were convenient. I hope that you enjoy it, and I hope that in a couple quarters down the line, you'll be ready to jump on it again. Well, I think your class has too. I'll speak for this part of it. Classes are fun. I think the favorite class I've taught at Burns was on the Bible in a year, because people came. We were in a small confined space, which kind of helped, and everybody, by and large, I would say the number was 85%, had read the material when they came to class. I've never had a class sustained for 52 weeks where the people had come prepared, and it floored me. I learned so much in that class, and I had so much fun doing it. It was huge. I love doing that. I enjoyed the James class a lot because it was so practical. Those have probably been the two favorite. I'm enjoying Joseph, But I'm just saying, of the ones that I finished, those have probably been the two that I've enjoyed the most. I like Bible Bowl a lot. It's a lot of work to do all those tests, but we don't get to do as much application. So it's not as satisfying in one way. It's satisfying because you get a lot of information, but it leaves me hanging a little bit because I want to see what the text is telling me to do instead of just what it says. But that's an important starting. But that's how I feel. I don't know. You have a right to disagree and be wrong. So Jeff comes up to you and he says, so Leanne, I've got this class. I need you to teach it. What's the first thing you're going to do?
And I just did that to her too, by the way.
Did you?
Yes, she's teaching the class for us.
Okay. That is a great question. What class, Mr. Jeff?
How about the 3, 4, 5-year-olds maybe for us on Wednesday night?
What are you going to teach, Leanne? You were the elder's favorite kind. That is good. That is good. One of the questions is, how do you decide what to teach if it's not assigned? What do you do?
Glenn asked me to take his place one night, my first adult class I picked. He told me I could teach anything. Well, I'll tell you my first reaction. Walking to the truck that night, I thought, what was Glenn thinking? Then by the time I got my truck and I was driving home, I was thinking, what was I thinking? But what helps me more than anything, he told me I could do anything I want to. And what helps me, what Randy needs more than anything, is to be told how to get through each day, day by day, the best I can.
Okay.
And my favorite part of the Bible of that is the Sermon on the Mount.
Okay.
Jesus preaching to a great number of people. And that's what I taught about that night, because that's what helps Randy the most. So I thought maybe it helped somebody else the most. So.
Very good. Okay. That's a great place, isn't it? What do I need? What do I know? What do I think will help them? There's 3 great questions to figure out what to teach. Now, long term, I'd like to see us put together a better kind of plan. That's perfect for Teach For Me Wednesday night. But when the elders get together and say, well, what are we going to talk about 2 quarters from now? James and I sit down and we play with it, and we'll open up. Sometimes we'll actually just go to the table of contents page of our Bibles so we see the whole thing. And I'll say Old Testament or New Testament. And you'll say, well, we just did the minor prophets and you just did the major prophets and sermons, and a year ago we did a class on the minor prophets, and he'd just done some Genesis, and Bible Bowl was Exodus. New Testament then. And I said, well, what in the New Testament? We did Philippians recently, and he did a class on the Timothy letters, and what do we do? Well, James, we haven't done anything on James. You're right, let's check the file. We haven't done anything on James since this time. And you just kind of work that way. You say, well, what do we have? What do we need? What have we neglected? Sometimes we look at a book and say, well, here's a list of topics, or here's a list of things we think people need to know about. I think people need to know about salvation. Okay, have we talked about that lately? If not, need to do it. Glenn taught a class, Love of the Truth. That was kind of some fundamentals, so we know that he's done that. What about... we haven't done anything for our parents to teach them how to be biblical parents. We need to put that on the list somewhere down the way. What does the Bible say about family? Okay. Wisdom. I haven't preached anything out of Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon in the last 2 years. Blind spot. Proverbs class. That's really how this goes. What are we missing? What do people need? Who are our teachers? Will they be able to teach this, that, and the other?
If I may.
Yeah.
On the opposite side of that too, I'm looking forward to the time in the very near future where Keith can come and say, Jeff, I would like to do a class on this subject. I enjoy studying about Jonah and the book of Jonah. Can I do a class on that, in the near future?
Absolutely.
For them, then we can key it in and I can say, okay, yeah, Keith, the spring quarter of 12 or the first 2 quarters of 12, you can, do it. And then, have people be able to have the confidence to come in and to the education program and say, this is the topic that I enjoy and I'd like to teach on this. And then work it in from the master list that time.
Yeah. Just so you know, we do have a list basically this quarter and the next 2 quarters with tentative plans down. And that's something that's on the wall even upstairs. It's not set in stone, but it's something we're working on. We've made progress that way. But do make sure you give the elders feedback on things that you think we need, things that you want. Sometimes those two aren't always the same, but we can do a little bit of both. Just things that you think would be helpful. Okay? Step 1 for this. You knew I was going to say that, didn't you? Pray about it, pray about it, pray about it. In other words, pray, Lord, what in the world have I done? Right, Randy? Pray for guidance, pray for wisdom, pray for your students. Pray a prayer of thanks for, really pray for your students. Pray a prayer of thanks for the word that guides you. Number 2, if I just found out I'm teaching a class and this is what I do, read the stuff. And I used kind of a colloquial phrase on purpose. Just read it quickly. I'm not saying this is not the step where you make 1,000 notes. If you get handed a Sunday school curriculum, a book, thumb through it and go, oh, okay, this is what this is about. Here's the general idea. Kind of start to notice what's going on. If you assign me a text class, the first thing I do is read it from one of the easier to read versions. Not the version I use for in-depth study. I think it's even an all right thing to use a paraphrase here, just to kind of get the storyline. And then you go back later and do the more in-depth study. So read the stuff. Number 3, the yellow pad really is a great invention. Just fill this thing up. Nobody else is ever going to see this but you. Just start writing down things. For Jonah, our homework, I thought, Tarshish, where's that? I need to get a map. Find a map. I wrote that down, you know. Nineveh, what do we know about that? Who quotes Jonah? That'd be interesting. Is there any references to Jonah? This is an awful hard to believe story. Do I believe it's true? Well, I do, but why? Those are some questions. Repentance. Grace. What about the fishermen? Or what about the guys on the boat? What did they think about this? Great fish, whale. What's the difference? Is there one? Just start writing things down. Jonah sure seemed to have a sorry attitude was one of my notes. Or what about the plant? Weird ending. Those are some things you might write down about Jonah. Number 4, think about your students. Again, one of the difficulties of teaching in church is the fact that you've got such a wide variety of people and places. And even in the Sunday school program, honestly. Because even in the young classes down here, 1st to 3rd grade is a big, or 1st and 2nd grade is a pretty big range. Especially if there's a kid who's on the trailing end of the 1st grade and the leading edge of the 2nd grade. It's tough, but think about who you've got. Think about what they need. Think about their family situations, because that affects what you do. One of the kids that might be a troublemaker in your class might be because their dad's not here and is being a terrible example. So you might need to think of a way, how can I be a stabilizing force for this family?
A lot of times I found they're the smartest kids.
Yeah.
Because you're not teaching them well.
Yeah, that happens. I heard one teacher say kids would rather be bad than dumb. And sometimes if a kid is ahead of the rest of them, they get bored and cause trouble. Sometimes if they're behind the rest of them, they don't want to admit that they're behind, so they cause trouble. Those are just distraction techniques. They're red herrings. Ignore them. Work on the person. So think about the class. When I'm preparing a class on a Wednesday night, I know that the adults on a Wednesday night generally are people that are always there. There are still differing degrees of maturity, but our adults who are there on Wednesday night are really pretty consistent, probably our most consistent people. So if I'm telling Joseph, I don't have to do all of the details. I don't have to tell you, okay guys, there's this story, and there was this story about a guy named Jonah. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he got in a boat. I don't have to spend much time on those facts. I can spend more time on analyzing the facts with them. If I'm teaching a Sunday morning sermon, I've got a lot more people in the room, and I've got to do a different set of work. I've got to figure out what needs help. When I'm trying to do Jonah's story, Jonah didn't want to be a missionary. I've heard him called the reluctant missionary. And I might need to work on a Wednesday night and say, is there somebody that you really don't want God's love to reach? That's an awful direct question, but if I can get you to think about that, I can get this story to make the difference in your life that it could. Step 5, Study. This is different than read the stuff. This is where you do the multiple version stuff. This is where you put into place Chip's plan from Thursday night. Word studies, dictionaries, concordances, commentaries. This is where you call up Keith and say, Keith, what do you think about verse 3 of chapter 2? And this is where you call up... I don't like it. I don't either. I'm against it. That's where you get on the internet. That's where you call somebody. That's where you come to the library. That's where you dig and you get answers to questions. And this is the part where the yellow pad starts to explode. This is the part where it overflows. If you've got a curriculum guide, go through it. Underline. Figure out what matters. Figure out if you think that the curriculum guide's right. Because they're not always. Sometimes there's soapboxes there too. 6, select your goal and your points. Does this sound familiar? Every class needs a goal. Every class needs points. After you see the text, things are going to start to stand out on that legal pad. Lots of things will start to stand out. You'll have to study more still after this step, but you see where you're going, and then you can figure out how you want to get there. This is where you make that theme sentence. The one sentence, if you learn anything today, it will be, the theme for this lesson is, this is where you make objectives. By the end of the Jonah class, for example, we might say, I understand that God's love extends even to my enemies. It's open even to my enemies. You will understand that obedience isn't optional. We'll understand that you cannot hide from God. We'll understand that sometimes the most sincere prayers are in the belly of a whale. Take that for what you want. Plan those things. And after you plan those things, you can plan a structure. You can figure out how to say those things. One of the most common new teacher mistakes that I see is approaching the pulpit with 23 loose pieces of paper. It's okay to have 23 pages of notes, just as long as you don't expect me to listen to the last 5 or 10 of them. In fact, I have a lot of pages of notes today. But since I have so many, they're in a book, so I can't get them out of order. Because it is such a momentum killer when you're teaching and you're teaching and teaching. And my next point is, hang on just a second. I'll find out what my next point is. But it is so important. You've got to remember this. I know what my next point is. I'll tell you in just a second. You really shoot yourself in the foot when you do that. When I preach a sermon, sometimes if I have a complicated PowerPoint, I break this rule. But my goal for sermons is 1 page of paper. Sometimes it's front and back. Again, rules are meant to be broken. These are just general things. But I try to make it 1 piece of paper, because I can't lose the second page that way. Because it's really awkward if you've got this great lesson and there's no conclusion. In fact, 2 or 3 weeks ago, probably some of you noticed this, the printer cut off the top line. And it was the line that had the sentence in bold that was going to wrap everything together. And I had spent probably half an hour on that one stupid sentence, trying to get it right. And I get to the pulpit, I turn the page and it's not there. And even though I knew it 10 seconds prior and 10 minutes later, oh, that deflates you. You feel so silly. Organize your notes. Don't come up there with your 20 pages of yellow pad. Take the time to handwrite, here's what I'm doing. Here's why I'm doing it. Staple it together, hole punch it, do what you got to, but organize it. Let's say you use the goal and objectives I had for the Jonah lesson. List the goal and the objectives and study each. That could be one basic thing. Or maybe find a way to tell it all as one story, or find a way to make the story make the point. Outlines are your friends, and they don't have to be balanced like your English teacher in the 8th grade wanted them to be. Harriet won't kill you. And they don't always have to have Roman numerals, but there need to be some sort of sections. It makes sense to have major divisions and major parts that you can put together to get what you need. It makes the lesson scale. If you've got an outline in a 40-minute class and you have 2 main sections and an introduction and a conclusion, instead of sitting through a 40-minute class, all of a sudden, to the attention span of your listener, they're sitting through 2 15-minute classes with 5 minutes at the beginning and 5 minutes at the end. That changes everything. Even though you're presenting the information the same, by the way that you structure it, it helps. Kids play a video game for 2 hours, but we complain that their attention span is 2 seconds. The reason for that is the video game changes, it uses structure, and it leads people to keep listening. We have a better attention span than we think we do if you structure things carefully. Have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or however many main points you need. Don't have 23. You can't remember it, neither can they. Decide the type of lesson you're going to use. Does what I'm teaching make sense to do via lecture or discussion or question and answer or interactive? Figure out how you're going to do it. Figure out where you're going. Make that map. That's how you'll know when you get there. Does that make sense at all? I hope that that makes sense. I know that when I teach Joseph tomorrow, I'm going to do 3 things. I'm going to start out by going over that homework and looking at other examples of people who did and did not give God the glory. I know that after I do that, we're going to look at some general passages about giving God the glory. It's kind of the second section. Then the third section, we're going to look at how Joseph was tempted not to give God the glory, but did. That wasn't on my notes anywhere. Because I had a simple structure, I remembered it. That makes it so much easier. Structure is your friend. It is really your friend. The reason preachers use alliteration, the 12 P's of Paul, is because it makes it easier for them to remember. And if it makes it easier for them, it might make it easier for you. And even if it's a little bit ridiculous, it sticks in your head better. 8, find supports. This is what supports look like in our neighborhood. Yeah, that's Butch's house, isn't it? Not enough cars, actually. How do I support my goal and my points? How do I do what I'm doing? What if I want the kids to know that Jonah was alone? Well, maybe I have them draw a time when they were alone. Maybe I tell a story about being lost. Maybe we could have a talk about a compass. Or maybe we could make a compass that says, when I follow God, I'm never alone. Hey, there's 5 ideas for you right there. Or maybe an illustration would fit. Or a picture of a car on blocks. It's funny what those things can do. Look at the ideas your curriculum book has. Walk through Michael's if you're looking for kids' crafts and just think, how could I teach this goal? How could I make these points with something I see here? Google it. Seriously, google.com, enter Jonah craft ideas. As an experiment, I did this last night. You can make a styrofoam plate of a fish and write a scripture on it and draw Jonah inside it. There's an idea for you. Or you could make a Play-Doh fish. Or that's actually a kit. This was clever. You make a big felt whale or big fish. You get one of those party blowers. You put a little Jonah printout on top of it so the kids can blow on it and the fish throws up Jonah.
That's cool.
Now, I'm just saying, 30 seconds in Googling and I found this stuff. Those are cupcakes that show the boat on the sea that was empty and the whale in the sea, supposedly. Hey, go to Oriental Trading Company. Here's this week's memory verse. Here's a pre-made thing. Or service learning. Well, if part of the lesson of Jonah is that God wants me to help people even if I don't want to, okay, I know the kids really don't love going to the nursing home, but we're going to take them. And we're going to teach that lesson. And say, guys, you know what? In Dixon Healthcare, it doesn't smell the greatest. And there's a lot of people who are in bad shape. But God loves them too, and we're going to go together and help these people. That's a lesson right there. I think that helps a lot. The song, who did, swallow Jojo Jonah? Silly little thing. That gets it in their heads. I Googled again. What do you know? There's the entire VeggieTales Jonah movie for free on YouTube. I didn't invest a lot of time in this search. Field trips. You know, you can take a field trip. Now, during Sunday school, I don't think you can probably get to Nashville and back, but you could go to the fellowship hall, or you could go outside, or that part at the end of Jonah's story where he's sitting under the shade of the plant. You could circle up your kids in July outside of those measly-looking little trees we have next to the church sign, and I think you could make that lesson come alive pretty easily, especially if you had a cup of cool water waiting. You could probably teach something there too. It's not hard to come up with this stuff. Just keep asking questions. Filter. Get rid of the stuff that doesn't fit your points. I had a really great presentation called Death by PowerPoint I wanted to show you. It is just great. I deleted it 3 times from this presentation because it didn't fit. I had to kill it eventually. I want to show it to you, but it doesn't fit. Filter the things that don't apply to your students. If you're teaching first grade, they probably don't need to know about the documentary hypothesis, the approach to the Pentateuch that explains who or whom didn't author them. They're probably not going to encounter that anytime real soon. But they might need to know that you really believe that Jonah's story happened, because that's an awful hard story to believe for a lot of folks. Think about that. Step 9, memorize. This is the most painful step for me. I'm not a good memorizer. But if you've got that structure, you can. Like I told you earlier, I just shot off to you what our Joseph class was about because it was simple enough. You can remember 3 things. And when you memorize, it has a neat side effect. You polish. Because as you're going over it in your head thinking, all right, here's what I'm going to do, here's why I'm going to do it, here's what I'm going to say. Well, that doesn't make any sense. That who did swallow Jonah song doesn't do anything. Except say who did. Oh, the fish. Yay. The kids got that. Now, if there's a reason to use it. But if there's not. Number 11, quit. Seriously, quit. Now, sometimes you don't have the luxury of wondering if you're going to work too long on a lesson. 7 o'clock comes and you better be done because it's 7 o'clock. But sometimes it is tempting to keep going back. But if you look at what you've got, you know what it says, it's reasonably polished, it has a plan, you can beat yourself up for the next 100 years trying to make the perfect lesson and it ain't going to happen. Oh, go read something else. Go do something else. Go take the lesson and live with it.
Tell about the man who got to church a little late and the preacher was still preaching and when he walks in he asks the guy, is the preacher done yet? He says, well, he's done, but he hadn't quit.
Yeah, and that happens. That's a bad feeling too. It's a really bad feeling when you do it. The crowd knows it and you know it too. Get feedback. Get some information that will help you next time. Maybe it's the index card. Maybe it's something like that. That's what I want to do now. What have you learned in this Thursday and the Thursday before? Has anything helped you? Has this been beneficial in any way at all? Other than keeping me out of Leslie's hair while I prepared? She appreciates that. Could you tell me one thing you learned? Or one thing you thought about that you hadn't thought about recently? Jeff, can I pick on you?
Prepare.
Okay.
Prepare. Study. Prepare. Preparation takes care of a lot of ills.
Proper preparation prevents poor performance.
Okay.
I've heard it a few different ways. Randy, can I ask you?
Well, preparing is definitely the key, but I have thought ever since I've been teaching, I've been thinking about me. What can I do for this class? Everything's been centered around what do I need to do? And I hadn't really thought about some of the things we've talked about. The age of the class you're speaking to, the maturity. I had thought about that when I've been in the audience, but I hadn't given a whole lot of thought about when I've been teaching to the audience. So, we got a new person here. Even just like the other night when Chip was talking about making sure everybody knew everybody. Most of the time in Wednesday night class, everybody does know everybody. But, when we get a new one, making sure you introduce yourself to him or, just small things that I hadn't thought about. It's made me think about the class you're teaching to and all even more, but first of all, being prepared.
Okay. Thank you. Butch, what about you? You hopefully got something today.
I'd have to say a bit of what Jeff and Randy was saying, but also, and I've noticed you do this quite often, is emphasizing the point that you want to get across. I probably have, I could say, I'm pretty sure I have not probably done a good job of that, and probably have let people kind of hanging at the wall as to what I guess the main goal, my main purpose of what I'm trying to present.
Okay. Leslie?
I really like when you were talking about asking the proper question. You talked about justifying the conclusion. If you can get them to try and justify the conclusions that are already in their mind, then it'll help generate discussion.
Okay. Very good. Brig? Okay. Plan a goal. Very good. Hey, you remember I've said about 20 times, there's one thing I want you to do? That was it, right? Yes.
What was it?
I don't know. I wasn't paying attention. Leg hand?
All of it's helped me, but like knowing that different people think differently.
Okay. That's a hard one. And you'd be amazed how many people that have taught a long time don't ever think about that. Because I assume you all think like me. But oddly enough, some of you are broken and don't think right. That's not what I mean, but learning to think about how other people think helps me help them. Juanita?
Well, I think one thing, those of us in the class can help the class by being interested in each other.
Yes.
Let them know we're glad they came and some new one that shows up.
Okay, very good.
And make them feel welcome and being enthused about the class as you talk to others about, oh, we started this new class and they're studying so-and-so and maybe get them feeling like they're missing something, so maybe they'll come too.
Yeah.
And I think that's and let the class realize that they are part of, this is a gift that they can have to help the class.
Yeah.
And maybe they don't feel like at that time they can be a teacher, but they could warmly welcome some new person that showed up, introduce them to maybe a few more, and that sort of thing.
Yeah. There's something I said recently in a lesson in passing. It was just sort of a little detail as I introduced a text. I didn't think anything of it except I thought it needed to be said, so I said it. I had 3 people come up after class, and there's a little detail and said, I didn't know that, and that made the text make more sense. You talked about how you can help the class by encouraging people. That really helps the class when people tell you specific things like that. Be a helpful student when you're in a class. Come prepared. If you don't understand something, ask a question. That really does help if it's a class where that's appropriate. Keitho?
Learning from my mistakes.
I make plenty.
And I've learned a lot. I make plenty of them.
Sandy?
I was just going to give maybe an example.
Oh, sorry.
Of that. Just like a couple weeks ago, that first PowerPoint I had, I used a script type font. I thought, make it more interesting, make it look better. But Donna, going home, said, that was hard to read. So, you learn. You learn things like that.
And even on little technical things like the PowerPoint.
Yeah.
I learned not to give you all my handouts at the beginning of class. That was a simple lesson, but very good. Sandy?
I think getting the class involved, but also I think your attitude of how you present the class.
Yeah.
If you go in there tired and you don't have that enthusiasm, you're not going to get the class involved.
That's true, isn't it?
And even kids can pick up
Absolutely.
on how you are.
It's hard to fake it some days.
It is hard to fake it, but the kids still, even kids young can pick up on how you're presenting your lesson.
If you're dreading teaching, they're going to dread learning.
Exactly.
Connie?
Well, this is my first class, but I'm kind of amazed at how much I don't know.
Well, join the club. Join the club. What really got this seat in my head was I took a grad class in Christian religious education, and the sheer volume of reading and material. There is so much good information on how to do a better job. This is cool, and it is just neat how much there is. I've got probably 15 books on the desk right now next door if you'd like to look at any time on this stuff. Some are better than others, but some of them don't directly apply, but most of them do indirectly somewhere. There's so much good material. I'm not content to have an okay Sunday school. It's too important. We need to have a great Sunday school. And we can. Glenn?
Well,
I know his name.
I think it's good to incorporate a lot of these different methods to try to reach your goal and evaluate at the end, especially questions.
Yeah.
Learning how to involve questions to get people thinking.
Do you still beat your wife?
Wrong question.
You know, how you word a question is important. Back to the planning and preparation stuff. We're done. These were the questions you guys asked. How do I decide to teach if no subject's assigned? Well, we talked about that a little bit, I think. How do I organize and prepare? Well, we offered one suggestion, that me, we, me, you, God, you, me. You remember that stuff? Me, we, God, you, me? I sound like an Indian tribe. How do I select an approach? Well, we didn't really cover that, but we did give you some things that guide those principles. Who are you teaching? Why are you teaching? What is your goal? What's available? What's appropriate? How can I be more creative? I'm going to give you the best piece of advice you've ever gotten on this. Just do it. I used to really gripe that I'm not very creative. And then I started thinking, I don't consider myself a creative person at all. But sometimes I think, how in the world can I get this across? And I just keep asking myself that question until I get an answer. Sometimes I start asking Leslie that question until she gives me the answer. But sometimes you do what it takes. And just keep asking and keep turning it. You know how if you turn a diamond, it kind of glistens a different way? When you study the text, keep turning it. And something will pop if your eyes are open. What are some different ways to make class more fun and interesting? Well, you plan it right, it gets that way. One study says that people tend to lose interest in anything after 15 minutes. So if you use that structure that breaks class into 15-minute sections, you're still teaching 30, 45 minutes. But instead of it being one long thing, all of a sudden it's been easier and there's a change in it. It gives it a pace that moves. This list breaks that rule terribly because I'm showing you one long list of things and you're just thinking, hurry up to get to the bottom so I can go home. How do I pick out age-appropriate materials? Consider your students. I'm no child life psychologist, but there are good things out there that kind of say, well, you know, your first graders probably don't need to be doing calculus. They don't need to do the biblical equivalent of calculus. Your first graders probably don't need to do a study of hermeneutical methods around silence and implication. But obedience, yeah. They need that lesson, so do I. Think about that sort of thing. How do you incorporate service learning? Well, if everything we're doing is about obedience, you remember our first week when Michael spoke? He said, after each lesson they had the I will statements. Because of this passage to obey, I will. That might be a gateway into that. How will I do this? And is there a way that I can start you obeying? That's why sometimes in class I give you cards to write cards to people. Because I think if I get you to do one in class, you might realize it's not that hard and you might do a second one at home. And I want you to see other people doing it. And other people that have no clue what in the world they're supposed to say. A friend of mine who was going to help us out, Albert, and keep him and his wife in your prayers. We were going to Skype last Friday or Saturday to get another session. And last Saturday, 2 weeks prior to the full term, they had a stillborn son, Griffin. And obviously he couldn't be with us and certainly understand that. But I sat at the computer for probably 30 minutes the other day. What in the world am I supposed to say to this guy that I've known for 15 years to let him know I'm thinking about him? I have no clue what he's going through, but I'm thinking about you. That doesn't get less awkward as far as I can tell. I've never heard anyone tell me it does. But I think what matters is that you do something. That's another lesson. How do you teach without being nervous? Keith told me you drink, but I don't think that's the right advice. Don't take yourself too seriously. Prepare, pray. How do I keep the class moving in the direction I want? Well, you're the teacher. You are allowed to say no. You're allowed to say just about anything. You're allowed to say, I'm sorry, we don't have time for that right now. Or, I'm sorry, I don't actually know the answer to that question, but if you'd like to, we can talk about it after church. Or you can say, ask the elders. Ask the elders. That's great. How do we get a curriculum moving and planned and in place? Well, we've talked about all of the building blocks. It's just a matter of setting down and putting them together. It's just a matter of time. It's not rocket science. None of this is rocket science. But it is significant. Questions, comments, anything else? How do I know when to quit? When you're done. Thank you. I've really enjoyed your help. We'll put this in the library. If there's anything I can do to help you teach, one of the fun things about being full-time is I'm in the office, and part of my job is to help you do your job. So if there's ever anything I can help you do to prepare a class lesson, I am really glad to do that for you. If I can help you find a resource, if you want to run something by me just because your wife and cat are tired of hearing your lessons, feel free. And if I fall asleep in the office, I won't tell anyone. Thank you.
Thank you, man. Thank you.